Today is May 17th.
I'll see you there.
It's now 6 o'clock.
I'll look for you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mary.
That's okay. Carry on.
Counselor, your ears just ain't working.
I'd like to now call to order the City of Sherwood Budget Committee, if you're ready, Russell. I'm kidding. Meeting for today. Katie, will you please do roll call?
Chair Mirda Meyer,
I am here.
Vice Chair Paul Mayer,
Here.
Tyrone Stammers,
Here.
Susan Claus, here. Nancy Taylor,
Here.
Amy Kutsky,
Here.
Kurt Studer,
Here.
Mayor Mays,
Here.
Council President Garland,
Here.
Councilor Young.
She will be joining us. She's running a little late because of her son's 16th birthday party tomorrow.
Councilor Rosner,
Here.
Councilor Griffin,
Here.
Councilor Kuiper,
Here.
Councilor Browse. Here.
Great, thank you. Tonight's meeting will be a working and listening session with Department Director presentations. We will have time for general public comment at the beginning of the meeting. If you wish to speak, please fill out the public comment form and give it to Jean. I will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the committee chair. I will now open the meeting to accept public comment on the 2018-19 City of Sherwood budget. Has anyone submitted any forms? Okay. I will now close the public comment portion of the meeting. A couple of quick housekeeping points. Tonight, we will likely need to engage in a lot of really pretty specific discussion points. And so I would ask that we not talk over one another. And also, please leave all of the microphones on. We're being recorded. And so it would be helpful to the public who may be watching to just hear us very clearly.
I would also say speak into the mic.
And speak into the microphone.
Since they're being shared.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a quick personal note. Last week, I got a little bit excited about a comment that Russell had made. And after the meeting, I apologized to Russell, but I would like to do that publicly. Russell had pointed out that throughout the director presentations last week, often and much, he heard the word status quo. And his point in the meeting was that he didn't feel like he heard staff and others questioning the status quo and challenging where cuts could potentially be made. And my response was quick and perhaps a bit abrasive. But the more I thought about your comments, Russell, and as we chatted after the meeting, I think semantics plays a huge part in the discussions that we have. And I appreciate that the intention behind the words status quo, perhaps from staff, refer to a budget that has gone relatively unchanged from years past. However, that's not to say that staff hasn't given great care and attention into crunching numbers to assure that the services provided by the City of Sherwood are astronomically high, and that they are also implementing best practices for the city. Joe, would you like to perhaps add some thoughts on those words, status quo?
I kind of want to echo what you said. I think that's a term that we have used that's been in my budget message, and I think we need to get a little bit more creative, because I think your reaction, Councilor Griffin, is probably what the public would perceive in terms of what that word means. And we don't want to be status quo. I don't think anyone in this room, whether they're budget committee members or staff, don't want to be creative and innovative and look at things differently. And I think we do that. So I think part of the challenge is for us to come up with better words next year and not necessarily use those words that can be perceived in a negative way by the public. I didn't view it that way. Councilor Griffin, you and I had talked about it earlier in the day, but I can definitely understand how it came across. So I think that's the challenge, is how can we come up with a different word or wording to describe a budget that doesn't change much year to year.
And so, Councilor Griffin, I apologize for being quick to defend staff and those words. However, I fervently believe that staff is and continues to work very hard for the citizens, for the city, with what resources we do have available. So I hope you accept my apology.
Yes,
Thank you. Okay, moving on.
Can I add one piece of housekeeping?
Yes.
Well, two pieces. First of all, the mics are on even though you don't hear them in this room. It's to eliminate the feedback. So the only way that they hear us on TV is through the mics, even though you feel like you're not talking into a mic. So just so you know, they really are on, they really are working. The second piece is I want to remind you as we go through this difficult exercise that we are talking about numbers, but we're talking about people. And the majority of the people we are talking about are sitting in this room or are watching us. And so I've had several people come to me that were distraught in some way about the way that some of the comments were handled last week. And so I would ask you to please remember, when we're talking about cuts, it has to be done. We know it has to be done. But please remember that these are people with families. And so take that into account when we're talking about this. Thank you.
So I don't believe we have any old business to address tonight. So we will move right into new business, beginning with general fund reduction options. Joe.
So 2 days ago, was it 2 days? You received a document from myself that primarily Katie and I have been working on, but we have been working with various department directors to try to achieve different scenarios for your consideration. This is in reaction to what you concluded last week's meeting, that you wanted to see scenarios and a range of cuts to the general fund, roughly in the $200,000 to $550,000 range. So we have worked hard over the last week to come up with those scenarios, and I want to make sure that everyone understands those scenarios and what we're talking about. We tried to put into the document what the savings is in terms of the cost reductions. I'm going to have Katie make sure there's another number in there that people may not understand, which is the increase in net income, which is a different number. So you may have questions about that. So I want to make sure that you ask Katie to get good clarification on that. I've asked we've identified the positions that we would cut to achieve those different scenarios. Most importantly, I've asked the department directors where those cuts are located to start to articulate what's the impacts in terms of services or efficiencies in the department. If you have questions about that based on what you read and you need more information, then they're here to answer those questions. And then I think the end result is this chart up here, which shows a couple things. Correct me if I get anything wrong. This is the 20% goal.
Let me get you a mic so that people watching.
Thank you. So this is the 5-year forecast with a whole variety of lines on it. This red line is the 20% goal. This is the 10% line that Katie added. This is your policy that you don't dip below this, but this is the goal we always strive for. This light blue line is the original proposed budget that I think caused tremendous concern by the budget committee, that scenario is not sustainable. And basically, you gave us the challenge to move that line up. We've added, since the fourth scenario, this black line, which is if we just moved all the exempt employees onto the salary schedule and not move them to market, how that line would shift. So that's what that black line is. The gray line is how it would shift in scenario A, which is essentially 2 FTE cuts. Scenario B is the green line with 3 FTE cuts. Scenario C is 4.5 FTE, and you can see what it does. And then the last scenario, D, is 5.5 FTE. So we can get to our recommendation. Katie and I both are recommending if you want to make these cuts, we believe that scenario B is the best scenario at this juncture. We can talk about that tonight, but that's this green line, which keeps us above the 10%, almost squeezes us out to 20% in year 4 and at 17% in year 5. Now those are
17 and 14.
17 and 14, sorry. I'm looking at these. So that's pretty similar to 5-year forecasts we've seen in the past, but significantly better than this very steep decline that everyone was concerned about. So that's a quick summary. We're here to discuss the different options. I want to make sure everyone understands the different scenarios, that we answer your questions, but ultimately what we are looking for to move forward in this process is a decision of which scenario we want, if any, to implement. And we have to get through the general fund tonight and some kind of conclusion from the committee, because the goal is whatever scenario you pick, Katie and I will rerun the numbers and basically present a proposed budget or a revised budget next week based on that direction. If we don't get direction tonight, we're going to be here longer than 3 nights, quite honestly. So.
Tim, could you grab a mic, please?
It would be helpful, I think, especially for folks that may be watching this in TV land, and maybe Katie, you could answer this, explain why these 10% and 20% fund balance goals are so important.
It's a great question.
So the first reason that they're important is the policy, because we're required to stick to policy, and the policy is that it will not drop below 10% and that we will strive for 20%. So that's the first. And the way that our policy is set up is a percentage of operating revenues, just so we know what percent of what we're talking. But there's a good reason for why we have these percentages, and it has to do with cash flow, because a large portion of cash flows in the general fund come from property taxes. And because of timing of property taxes, at the end of October and the beginning of November is when cash starts to get really low, because it's right before property taxes come in. And so that 20% gets us just to where we can make all of payroll until the first property taxes come in for the year. And then it bumps the cash amount up and sustains us throughout the year. And this tends to be a problem only in the general fund. The utilities have monthly bills that come in, so the cash flow isn't as much of a problem. We should not be borrowing from the utility funds to pay general fund salaries. That's not appropriate. The general fund needs to be paying its own salaries with its own cash, and that's why the 20% is what we strive for.
I have a 2-part question, and this is mostly for folks at home. When was the compensation study implemented? When did it begin? And at the time, and Joe, this is probably for you because I believe it was before Katie joined the city. At the time that the compensation study happened, where were proposed increases scheduled to come from? If proposed increases were anticipated, where were those funds supposed to come from?
Well, they would essentially come from, we didn't know what those anticipated increases were going to be until you actually did the study. So out of general fund revenues, I mean, it's a very simple answer. Can we afford to implement all of the necessary salary adjustments to be competitive in the marketplace? My original proposed budget included all of the salary increases. We've already done it for the 2 unions. Those decisions have been made. The only ones that were questionable were the exempt staff, and that was included in my budget. So the budget's balanced. It is a balanced budget. I think the question is, with those implementation of those salary increases in combination with PERS and other kind of benefit costs and things like this, the 5-year forecast doesn't look sustainable. So I don't know if that answers your question. Tom can talk a little bit about when things started if you want to know more specifically in terms of the compensation study, because he managed that with the consultant.
Well, I guess the reason for the question is typically when an evaluation is done, recommendations aren't typically reduce salaries. If a recommendation is made based on a compensation study or even a property tax valuation, more often than not, numbers go up. They don't come down. So I would guess that at the time that the compensation study was approved, there had to have been some discussion of how that would impact the overall budget and what kinds of impacts that could potentially have on the city.
Again, it had been 10 years since we had done this, so we knew that our gut was that we were below market in a number of different positions. We didn't know how much or what the financial impacts would be until we actually got the results of the study. As the consultant said through the process, when you adjust salaries to get everybody to market is usually a heavy lift. And some jurisdictions, depending on where they are, or some organizations, depending on where they are, may not be able to fully do that. I put together with my staff a budget that gets everybody there. Raises some questions about the future, which are very good questions, but again, the budget's balanced. And remember, 2 of the unions have already been adjusted to get to market. So treating exempt employees differently raises significant concerns for me as the city manager in terms of morale in this organization and retaining good people. When you go out, as I said last week, with open eyes to see how you're doing in the marketplace and you discover that you're below market and you don't make adjustments, that's a problem.
Yeah, without question.
From my perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does anyone have any other, Susan?
So the different lines that we have, the black line that you just put in there would be that savings of $213,000 every year, right? That what you're reflecting is that if those increases aren't given to the non-contract staff, right? Am I interpreting that correctly?
I suppose technically, but I 100% do not believe that that's true. And the reason that I do not believe that that's true is we had one open position, for example, and we were unable to recruit anyone on the old salary schedule. We were not able to recruit anyone at step 1 on the new salary schedule. Even someone coming in had to be brought in somewhere closer to market on the new salary schedule. That's how non-competitive we are in the market. And so we believe that if we do not bring staff, and I should say I believe that Joe and I have talked enough that he agrees, but I'll speak for myself, that if staff is not brought to market, that we will lose a significant amount of exempt staff, and in doing so, we'll need to recruit new exempt staff, and the new exempt staff will cost as much as we would have had to pay to bring our current staff to market, and we'll be left with people with less experience who will be paying more for, and that in the long run, we will not have saved any money. And I truly believe that to be true. And just for the record, my pay doesn't go up for the market, so it makes no difference to me because I'm too new. So my point is on that black line, it's expressing $213,000 in the budget that would be saved if those increases were not done. And that $213,000, I mean, I'm just looking off of page 2 of the questions.
Of the questions. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and so that $213,000 would be a different option, but could be in addition to some hybrid of the other options.
could be, yes.
It could be, yes. I do not recommend it, but yes,
Okay,
it
I
could be.
I just wanted to make sure that that was, so that black line is just discreetly for that 213,000, and we're going for somewhere between a $200,000 to $550,000 range.
That's correct.
And what was the position that was held open? It was a police.
It was an
position.
IT position.
An IT position? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we added the black line because I was getting some questions about, well, what if you didn't move everyone to
Sure.
market? That was a good, legitimate question, and we wanted to show what that would look like on this chart. And that's certainly an option.
Right, and the fact that we have two separate unions and then we have another set of employees, nothing's ever going to be fair. I mean, in that sense, we've already had historically, we've already had where we've had contract raises, but we've had non-exempt not raises.
Correct, which is one of the reasons we've fallen behind.
So I totally get what you're saying, Katie. But we've also got challenges, so thank you.
So the black line, it says it brings the staff to the lowest position on the new.
The lowest position without lowering
without
anyone's
lowering their- So
current pay.
basically keeping them status quo.
It does raise them onto the scale if they're not.
If they're not on the scale.
For example, it does give me a raise. So I'll talk about me because I am there, because I'm so far below right now that it gives me a substantial raise because the lowest point on the new scale is quite a bit higher than I currently make because I'm so far below. For those who have been here a long time, it takes them from being at the top of the scale to the bottom of the scale.
But with maybe a tiny or
With a small-
barely any.
Right, that's
Our
correct.
16, 18, 20-year employees who haven't had raises in 8 years.
It also ends up putting a new employee who just came on in a position and an employee who's been in the position for 6 years at the same rate.
Right.
If we do that.
Katie, you mentioned the study was done compared to market. When you refer to market, are you referring to a comparable public sector job or private sector job when you say that we have people that could potentially leave for better paying positions? Is that study public sector or private or company?
Public, cities.
It's cities.
Other cities.
Okay.
Is this our chance to ask questions about all the scenarios?
You can ask staff anything you want.
Correct. I have a question about option C. Oh, thank you, sir. Option C, the one FTE parks person removed in that scenario, does that one person do all of those things that's in that paragraph?
Craig, can you come up and
It's like
help them
a whole
explain?
army of jobs assigned to the one. Did anybody not? Did you read that?
Yes.
And I'm not questioning Craig at all. I just would like, because it seemed like it wasn't. It seemed like it was also not just parks. They like touched on a lot of different things. If you could just explain.
Yeah,
So.
depends on the time of year.
Yeah.
You take the water features and all that stuff that relates to our summer peak use, that's from the end of May through the end of September. And you take the parks that are in that for mowing, landscaping, that's about 4 days a week of work right there during our peak seasons from March through the end of October. We're just mowing.
That's the one person.
One person with a seasonal usually is how they go out if we have seasonals. And we just raised the rates in seasonals not too long ago because we were having problems getting seasonals here at $12 or $13 an hour at the time. And we're paying seasonals $15 an hour. And we finally got them here in February instead of waiting until June and being 2 or 3 months behind. So what I can say is you have about 4 days of mowing there during the peak season. Trail maintenance is usually filled in on the 5th day. And then what happens if you cut that position is you mess all the other park staff up, the schedules they're on for mowing at other locations. That position also usually works the weekends. So they also mow besides just taking care of the water feature on the weekends at school district property or at those parks when they can get in.
Craig, do they also maintain the bathrooms that we have, the public bathrooms?
They will help out. Our janitorial company is supposed to maintain them on the weekends every day, but at times we have to surface them depending on the use.
So would this mean less mowing at all of our, we still need to maintain the school district ones regardless, right, because of our contract?
Yeah, so this position is not with the school district.
Okay.
And But it's not saying that if something gets done during the week between the 4 or 5 of them, that they don't go mow at a Laurel Ridge on a Saturday because they're off schedule someplace else. What I can see happening is here, similar to what's happened in other cities, is we don't mow. Stuff doesn't get mowed on a weekly basis. It goes to, like the school district used to do, 14 to 21 days out. And then you have employees working longer getting grass clippings and stuff picked up because a lot of times we don't have to bag it now.
Hey, Greg, can I follow up on that? In that paragraph, it says we would cut services to Murdoch Park, Stellarton Park, Woodhaven Park, County Square, Public Works. Service, so not just mowing, what other kinds of services are we talking about that we would not have in Stella Olson, we would not have in Woodhaven Park?
Well, others would have to pick up the load. We would still do our playground inspections to make sure our playgrounds are in compliance. There could be some interruptions to having seasonals help with music on the green and stuff when that comes. If we have the workload that we can't let the seasonals go work with Kristen's group. We have park reservations every week. That's part of the weekend staff. That's what I mean. They have about an hour of park reservation stuff they take care of during the summer months, as well as the water feature, and then they're off and mowing and they do the water feature at the end of the day. This one gets it 3 times a day. You have to have 2 people here for water feature because you have to enter confined space on vaults in their ground. So it really hampers your business. And we've looked at going with temp services, but they don't work the weekends. In the past.
So would it be potentially higher rental rates for people who wanted to use the various parks and such, just to be able to keep the places clean?
You could look at that. But I think it's been a while since we looked at those. Kristen's group and the Park Sports probably looked at those, and we've talked about looking at them. But I don't think they're going to be a huge difference from what they were 3 or 4 years ago. Park reservation is really not a money maker.
Thanks. Joe, thank you for putting together, and Katie, thank you for putting together different scenarios. And looking at your scenarios, C and D, the first impression that I got, and I might be wrong, that it was that you selected 3 positions between those 2 scenarios that are vacant. So it's very, and I would completely understand that logic because it doesn't. Emotionally, it's not impacting somebody or a position that you're calling out that is occupied. Last week, I made the comment of urging that look to find a number between 400,000 and 500,000, and I'm still on that opinion. And I am of the opinion that instead of trying to get into what is the right choice, beyond your recommendation of B, to pick a number that makes sense and then return it to you and Katie and the management team to determine what is the best choice to make in the coming weeks, so it's not a weekend exercise or a 1-week exercise. Because also in looking at the email that was sent out to the Budget Committee today on staffing changes in the last 5 years, 6 years, the maintenance person, that just is, for me, is clear that was added to the budget because of right, it was at the same time we expanded the agreement with the school district to take over school district property. And so the notion of that just doesn't make sense to me. But is there some other scenario through whatever that we can land on a number in the range that I'd like to be? And if that means collectively at the beginning let's say we pick the number of 400,000, and let your team figure out what that means from efficiencies, whatever, to get there.
Can I ask why 400,000?
Because it's the low end of my range from last week, and I'm trying to when I look at the reduction in the forecast, I want to be close to 20% after 5 years based on all the assumptions in your model.
So,
Because there are things that I hope we collectively do as a community, as a budget committee, as a council, to improve the curve in the coming years than the model suggests. That is still, they'll be efforting, but certainly not assured. And if we stay on that track, none of them are turning upwards. They're still all pointing downwards, even the green line or the yellow line.
and this is where,
Yeah, I would like to,
Okay.
oh, I
No,
apologize.
Katie, did you want to
No.
chime in? Actually,
that
before
Chair?
you do,
Yeah.
Amy had a quick question. Or Jennifer, okay.
Okay, so that being said, this is my third year on the Budget Committee, and what I have noticed over the past 3 years is that typically the department heads will come in and they'll talk about their budget, and what's always been a nice surprise at the end of every year is the numbers that they estimate are conservative. And the bottom line is that the general fund is generally higher than the estimate. In the past 3 years, it's been higher than the estimate at every budget committee that we discuss. So when we're looking at these scenarios, some of this can be somewhat hypothetical, that you're looking at this magic number of 400K, 250, whatever it is, whatever these scenarios are, that conservative estimate is going to get you something more at the end of that fiscal year. At least that's been my experience. So just keep that in mind when you're throwing out different numbers. That's what I wanted to say.
Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, just when you had started talking, Katie, or Joe had mentioned that, there's two different numbers on each of these scenarios as well, and that you were going to walk through that. Can we just kind of jump back out of the scenarios and just go over those real quick?
So one of the things that we haven't looked at in the past is our investments. And I've been working with the state on getting an investment policy written up that meets the state guidelines so that we can look at investments outside of the LGIP and look at investments with a higher, with more revenue. And so what I've done in these scenarios is I've looked at the balance that we have that's in excess of 20%. And if we were to invest that in bonds, and I use a conservative, which is the current yield, which we could likely get higher yield if we were to do some longer rates. And it would take us setting a new policy, but I could do a work session because everything's been approved by the state, everything's gone through. We have a policy where we could do that and increase our investment revenue, our interest revenue, for those 3 years where we have the balance that's over the 20%. And if rates do go higher than the 2.25 where they're at right now, which I envision them going higher even by July 1st. And the first thing I would say is if, we have that money from the school district that's supposed to be coming in, it's a little higher than we anticipated. That's part of that because there is more. We ended up selling more acreage than planned. So that's in addition. That's also part of that excess revenue, that excess income. And then we invest that, and that has additional interest. So that's where you get that bottom number comes from doing something different from the money that's over the 20%. So we make the cuts now, and we put that money in something that gains more interest so that it can bring money in. So rather than cutting that one more person, we put it aside and we gain that much in interest. And that's why I thought that the increase in net income, those were the numbers that I was going for. And so in the scenario B, the increase in net income is 442. So to me, that met the 400 and was almost at the 450. So that's where I was at with the numbers that were requested, because I made changes both on the revenue side and on the expense side by looking at this. And I do have a broker that could come on the 12th to do a work session if we decided that that was something we wanted to look at. We already have the bank accounts set up, everything, so that we can pull the trigger on a dime if we want to. I just haven't had a chance to do the work session with council. But
that's important information, and the number that's associated with each title, I told her, don't put the net income number because people are going to be like, what are you talking about? Put the reduction. They want to see what the reduction is, but that explanation is very important.
No, it's very
Likely to be more confusing to try to articulate that in this document versus doing what you just did now. So
a question on that then. So the lines up there, does that represent the?
That's with the interest.
That's with the interest.
With the interest.
Including the original budget? You had assumed that
So
also?
no, the original budget does not have it in it. So the proposed budget, the blue line does not have the interest. The scenarios A, B, C, and D do.
Amy, did you have a follow-up?
I did. Just when I was looking at this, it looks like we're cutting quite a few positions and reshuffling a lot of the work.
That's correct.
Is that sustainable for staff to be doing work outside of what they're already doing and picking up additional work? And are we accounting for enough outside consultants in order to maneuver some of that work if it can't get done?
well, it depends on which position you're talking about.
Like the one that stuck out was, we're going to take out part of the legal group and we're going to add 5,000 in for consulting.
Josh can come up and answer specifically about how he would handle that.
Okay.
If we were to eliminate the assistant city manager position, most of the work that Tom is responsible for still has to get done. Most of that would shift to me, at least initially, and other managers that would have to pick up additional work. And that's a reprioritization of priorities. HR has to get done.
For sure.
But many city managers in jurisdictions this size and smaller have responsibility for that program with a staff person. So it would stretch us, certainly. You can't eliminate good people who do good work, and when you have to do that work, not be tested. So again, I think part of the recommendation from my perspective in terms of sticking to B is I think we can figure out how to get the work done with the existing resources, and most of those cuts would not affect outside services. The public would not necessarily feel that. Internally, we would feel that, but we'd have to work smarter and figure things out. But I've got a great team, and I think we can do that. Cutting parks, cutting the arts center manager, citizens will feel that, in my opinion, and they'll see that.
And you don't think that additional work would then lead to more people leaving to find outside?
There's always that risk.
Always that risk.
But this goes back to paying people market. And I've had people say to me, if I'm compensated fairly, I love working here, and now this has finally been adjusted, and if I have to have more work on my desk, I'm certainly going to be more open to that if I'm compensated fairly, versus if I'm not compensated, and now you're just going to add work to me, Joe, that's going to cause potentially people to be looking elsewhere.
I think
we always risk losing people. So by doing what we're suggesting doesn't mean that we won't lose good people. We'll lose people because we're in a very tight labor market, and it happens all the time. So the deeper you go in the scenarios, for me, the more risk I see. That's just from a balancing the fiscal future and making sure we're sustainable, but also balancing we're in the service business.
Well, from my perspective, I see risk in all of the scenarios, and I see us opening ourselves up to some liabilities as a result of some of these scenarios. And so if we can talk a little bit about what that looks like, Josh, I have some questions for you. So as we're looking at some of the cuts that have been proposed in your budget in particular, some of the impacts that we see would be response time on legal requests the addition potentially of outside counsel or consulting work, all of which is costly, and could also initiate greater legal troubles for the city. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think absolutely with these changes there would be some impact on response time, like it says in here. I tried to, in discussions with Joe and Katie, identify some of the areas where those impacts would be the most significant. My work is always a matter of triaging to some degree, and I can say confidently that the things that have to get done absolutely will get done, no matter what. That's not in any question. The things that will take longer will certainly cause some frustration and maybe cause some inefficiencies, but I don't foresee those as being liability issues. Things like public records requests, the way the law works, it's changed recently, but still essentially what it is we have to respond within a reasonable amount of time given the nature of the request and our workloads. So if it takes a little bit longer to get a request responded to, that's not necessarily a liability issue. Requests for proposals, that just slows things down in terms of if it takes longer to get an RFP out, it's longer before we get the contract in place, it's longer before we get the work done. But it's not really a liability issue. So I don't think the impacts are necessarily things that would increase our liability, but there would be impacts for sure.
And what about the business analyst position? That one, oh, that's actually IT.
That's IT.
So my apologies. I want to talk to Brad too. Did anyone have any questions for Josh?
I do have a question. The administrative assistant for the legal has specific skills. So they have legal skills, but they also have administrative assistant skills. What do we have the opportunity, I'm assuming you do through your management system, if we are talking about an administrative assistant, it would be easier to share the legal administrative assistant into the other areas than try to get the other areas to understand what the legal assistant does. Is that making sense to anybody? To me, that is a position that we need in order to facilitate the whole city. You know, we can't be having the city attorney doing a lot of routine things. And if the administrative assistant, 20% of her time or his time, whoever it is, that paralegal is over preparing something else for Joe or for Katie or something else. To me, that seems like a better use of resources than losing the skill of the legal assistant versus an administrative assistant.
I think that makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. I think there are probably a number of factors that went into the recommendation that you see before you. One of them is probably this other component about expanding the legal internship program and that being a possible source of getting that more legal work done. It's probably easier to get a legal intern to do that type of work at a quality level than to get an intern just to do general administrative assistant work.
Amen. I mean, and I understand that concept of getting the free legal help, but it's temporary. They're also in school. They're doing it for free. I mean, we get what we pay for type of a thing. And so I totally understand it and as something that's helpful to the legal department and helpful to those people that are in school. It's a great program, but I don't think we can rely on free help from Lewis and Clark to manage ourselves. I think that it's mission critical that our attorney have that legal assistant, and she or he is undoubtedly going to be able to do other administrative things if we need, as you guys are all doing, pitching in.
Yeah, I will say there are definitely a lot of question marks in regard to this reorganization concept. a lot of things that not only the city hasn't done before, of course, because it's a new having an in-house legal department, something I haven't done before even in a previous position. So it's kind of, we would have to see how that works out. One in particular that is kind of a question for me is with regard to the legal interns that we would get to work during the school year. For the summer, we get a lot of interest. I think we had roughly 20 applicants for this year, and very high quality applicants. Our experience with last year's was great, and this year so far is great. I'm not just saying that because she's back there. But it's definitely more challenging to get somebody to work during the school year, and especially for free. And so the quality of applicants we'll get necessarily may not be the same, and the number of hours we'll get probably would be less. So that's something to be determined.
Thank you. Amy and then Tim. Quick question. On a legal assistant versus an intern, is there a huge knowledge gap between the two?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. How to describe that? They're very different. So a legal assistant is going to be somebody who, in general, has a lot of experience working as a legal assistant, and experience, just professional experience in general, right? So the work that they're trained to do is at a lower level, but they know how to do it really well. A law student, legal intern is a law student, right? So their knowledge is, they're being trained at a higher level, but they're very early in that process. A lot of their knowledge is much more theoretical than practical. And a lot of them, this may be their first legal job or even their first full-time job.
Thank you.
So maybe from a context point of view, for a city this size, is it typical to have a legal assistant and an attorney? Can you give us some context with other cities around us? I'm just trying to understand kind of the scope of work relative to a
Right.
city this size.
That's a great question. And I haven't done a survey to see where we're at there. Just anecdotally, there's a variety. I know that pretty sure like Tualatin and Newburgh both have legal assistants. Tiger just recently started a in-house city attorney program, and last I talked to her, they did not have a legal assistant. That's a larger city. I'm not sure what they're doing for support staff services. Clearly, the attorney's not doing everything herself. Right. So that's a different comparator. In my experience, it's you need to have some level of support staff. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. When I first started here, before we hired a legal assistant, and we didn't have a formal arrangement for me to have support staff from somebody else on like a percent time basis. I was doing almost everything myself. That was a really inefficient way to do things. There's no need for me to be, spending my time making copies or whatever, or word processing. So I guess the question is the support staff work that I would get through like a 40% time with a regular administrative assistant plus legal interns sufficient or not? Absolutely, there needs to be some, though.
Well, I just thought maybe Joe could explain his thought process of sharing the admins we do have then and how they could fill in for Josh and other things they wouldn't be able to do for Josh because of legal.
Yeah, obviously the legal work, our admin staff would not be able to, but we have admin staff that are confidential. These would have to be confidential employees, so because of the nature of the work that we're doing, we would not have Josh doing copies and things like that. So I have a confidential admin assistant 3. Katie will have an admin as well eventually after she fills the position that just is going to become vacant. Between the two of them, I think we have adequate resources to give the basic type of admin support to Josh. It just will not be the legal work that probably a legal assistant could provide.
What percentage of legal work does your legal assistant do for you, would you guess?
It's probably,
say, right?
probably, yeah, it's really hard to say. And that line between what's legal and what's not also is kind of blurry too. Probably on the order of 50-50, maybe 60-40, somewhere in that vicinity. The other thing that is mentioned in here, I have money in my training budget that was some that's allocated for me and some that's allocated for training my legal assistant. We haven't proposed any cuts to that. So I would think at the very least it would be necessary that whoever is going to be providing administrative support to me is going to have to use some of that budget to develop those skills to at least be able to do some of that work. They're not going to be a legal assistant. But if I can send them to some seminars on RFPs, for example, and they can have at least a little more knowledge in that area, that would be very helpful.
Tyrone, did you have a follow?
Not for Josh, so
Okay.
if we want to finish
Can
that
I-
first, that's
Kim,
fine.
there's another suggestion that Katie wants to put on the table that she's expressed to me. Again, we haven't had months to analyze this. We've had less than a week to figure this out. So
This is one that I had, when Jean came to me with her resignation, so she will be leaving us soon. And I had started thinking of how to reorganize finance. My thought was, what if we took the legal assistant and kept the legal assistant, but made the legal assistant a legal/HR/finance assistant, and did not fill the finance tech position, and that then she could do the administrative work for finance when she had some downtime, because there isn't really 40 hours a week of legal work. So she would still be available anytime there was the legal work, but she could also back up HR, especially if we did scenario B and then we didn't have an HR director. We would then have someone to do some of the HR admin, and then she could do the finance admin for all of the things like these budget books and the minutes for the meetings and things like that. And so that was a scenario that
That similar impact.
it's a similar impact, because instead of a half a position on hers, it would be a whole one. It's slightly less than the impact of cutting the assistant full-time. I'd have to run the number. I haven't run the numbers. But it would be similar because they're both fully general fund, so the impact on administrative overhead and all that is exactly the same for the two positions. Her position is two grades higher, so the legal position is 2 grades higher than the finance position, so there would be that difference. But other than that, so it wouldn't be significantly different. Just a thought.
You wouldn't lose the legal.
And then we'd still have that legal
That's-
expertise.
Makes a lot.
Do you think we'd be able to recruit somebody that has the skill set to go across those positions?
No, I mean, the
would
person,
retain
we would retain
current
the
person.
person who's here right now.
And that person has the skill set to do finance and HR?
I believe, having seen her work, I believe that she could.
correct.
She's here?
Not here.
Oh, okay.
We're saying that it's
Oh,
not even. Well, this is the first I've heard of that idea, but it sounds wonderful to me.
I bet.
And the only reason that came up as an idea that Katie was brainstorming in reaction to the news that Jean was going to be moving on somewhere. So that I don't know exactly the timing of that in comparison to putting this together.
it was last
so.
weekend, so we had already done the scenarios, and then I got the information and thought, should I restart the scenarios? And
So, I think, again, part of our job is to figure that out. I don't think it's your job as the budget committee to manage the city. I appreciate the concerns that you have and the input. Your job is to look out, among other things, besides approving the budget, but to do it in a way that looks out over the next 3 to 5 years and keeps us on a good, sustainable path. So I don't want to get too bogged down into the day-to-day operations of the city. That's our challenge. And as I said, I think I've got great staff who think outside the box, and we can figure this out. We've done it before. We'll do it again.
anyone have any other questions for Josh?
Not for Josh.
No? But how about for Josh? Anyone? Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
Tim?
I just want to echo what Joe was saying. I think they know how to run their departments. They know what's going to work best in terms of how to distribute the resources. And going back to something Keith said at the beginning of the meeting, I think it's more appropriate for us to be focusing on what's the monetary target and then let them figure out the best way of achieving that.
Okay.
So my question is, it's two-part. In the actuals that we see, we know that it was in an economy that was growing. So I'm not sure what your projections are looking at as far as overall economic growth nationwide, community-wide. But we are seeing inflationary pressures. I don't know what the number would look like if we were to enter a recession, but I guess the question is when we do see contraction, how quickly does that affect your revenue? Is there a lag in months or years or?
So it may impact some of our development revenue, but the property taxes, there's such a distance between our assessed valuation and our market valuation that we can have huge declines in the market and it's not going to affect our property tax revenue. And our property tax revenue is our biggest main stream of revenue, so it's not going to affect that. It can affect franchise fees a little bit because people might scale down on their Comcast package or something, but probably not significantly. And this model is fairly conservative as far as those increases go, in the sense that for the revenues, we've been conservative, and for the expenses, we've been conservative in the sense that they have risen to higher levels. So if inflation, if we truly hit a recession, we'll also likely see less increases in the CPI. So our payroll will go down. So the difference will go down as well. So I believe that this model will play well with inflation. The only thing that could there are a couple things that could significantly change it. One, we truly don't know what will happen with the the camera enforcement of speed. It's a new program in Oregon. There's some variation there. And two is construction. I mean, that market can come and go, and we've done our best to look at what's happening over the next 5 years, and when do we expect Tonquin employment area to come in, and when do we expect the annexation area to start building, and all of that has been built into this, but there could be a variance of a year or two either way. So I would see that affecting revenue more actually than when we hit a recession, because I did build in a somewhat of a recession in years 3 and 4, years 4 and 5 of it, where I started to bring down inflation and affect it that way, as well as growth in the housing market.
It's a very good question that we've talked about. No matter where we land through this budget, what are we going to be? What's going to worry me at night in terms of our revenues are the exact two things that she said. Speed cameras plummet. The revenue we anticipate, although it's conservative, was too high, and it drops significantly, and the plateau is much lower. Then we've got an issue in terms of revenue. We won't have the volume in terms of tickets, so some of the additions that we've made to deal with that volume may be cut in that case because they don't have the work. So that's an important one, and then development is the key. And if development slows down for whatever reason, reductions will probably have to be made within the development department, and that's been done before. Folks that have been around here for a while, we've dealt through that. So
there's always a level on it when bad times happen with development. There's a level of lag because you want to retain your quality people.
Yeah.
And see if it's just a blip or not.
Yep.
Tim, you had a...
Yeah, so a quick question and then just a contextual statement. the 2017-18 numbers that you have in there, that includes the profit minus interest on the school property, correct? So,
That's correct.
okay, so just for context for everyone, if we hadn't had that lucky event of selling that property to school, I'm guessing that black line would have continued trending down as opposed to going up. So the reason it went up is because of that property sale, not because we saw a change in what was happening with our expenses overall. So we would be in much worse condition right now if we hadn't had that property sale.
Talking about the blue line or the black line?
Black line.
Black line.
Well, both, yeah.
All of
That's
that,
bike.
the starting point,
Bike.
that starting point,
Gotcha.
where they all
About
divide.
$1 million, if I remember right. Yeah.
So Tyrone, you had a,
Yeah, I have just a follow-up question to earlier, and I should have first started by saying I truly appreciate the work you've done. Having been in your seat when I worked in the private sector, I had to make very difficult decisions, and I know it's not a enjoyable process whatsoever. In terms of the wages, my follow-up question is, you had mentioned that the market you're comparing it to is the public market, and I just happen now to be a public employee myself, so I can relate. Your concern of losing employees, and I can appreciate from your standpoint, because your job is to take care of your employees and to retain good employees. But that is a number I think we would be amiss if we still didn't at least look at it from a creativity standpoint. And what I mean by that is, from the market standpoint, do you have a sense that we have similar cities near us that are in a very different situation in terms of they are able to hire public employees, that there are, if our employees do go out and look for things, that there's opportunity for them? Or, I mean, because from my standpoint, what I see, and again, I don't see all the city municipalities, but what I see is a very flat market, if nothing else, cities that are in the same situation that we are, and that is we're trying to figure out how do we cut costs, at the same time retain good employees. So when you say market, do you have a sense that if we don't make changes to our wages, that there are cities around us that our employees are going to go off to because they can find better opportunities?
So I'll interject if you don't mind, and if you want to say more. The forecast that we're seeing is a similar forecast in every government type in Oregon, be it city, county, school district, state. So they all have challenges in that regard, driven by PERS, driven by other things. The low unemployment rate, so there's, on the private sector, there's huge demand to lure people with the skills to go private.
Right.
In the public market, what I mainly see in my short tenure back and what I've seen in the past is retirements. When you're talking with leadership, department heads, directors, when those folks are generally towards the end of their career, so those are the folks that they'll be retiring, and then they're out recruiting, so it's either an internal promotion or recruitment from the outside. And so that's when that's some of your greatest risk, right, even in this situation.
Sure.
In my opinion, and I was at a meeting on Monday, and Rob Dixon, the community development director for Hillsborough, announced his retirement, and there'll be lots of people clamoring for that job.
Katie, Joe, did you, yeah.
So I wouldn't say that we're aware of a lot of openings. We're aware of how our employees feel about certain situations.
Sure.
And we're aware of how our middle management feels, and we're very concerned. We're also very concerned about morale, and not just, and you don't know me as well, but those on council know I'm not a merchant. There ain't no love. I'm not a feely person. I'm a thinking person.
Sure.
But from a thinking standpoint, the the workload and the impact that having bumped everyone else up and not bumping them up again would be absolutely disastrous. And like I said, I can't even explain why or how, but I can say that the efficiency, the workload, the number of sick days people take, I mean, all of that truly will explode if this does not go through. And not because anybody's trying to get back at the city, just because they will feel like their legs have been taken out from under them. And I think that us as executive management are trying to do what needs to be done to make sure that our city has the morale it needs to stick through this tough times that are ahead of us and can do what needs to be done. And the best way to do that is to have our employees know that management is behind them.
And I'll just piggyback on that. I am a merchant, so which doesn't mean anything.
He's the feeler, I'm the thinker.
So, but I have talked. I've had one-on-ones with a lot of my department heads who have been here a long time and have been through previous compensation studies years ago where union employees got compensated. They made adjustments. And at the time, for whatever the reasons, management was left out. Can't afford it, all the things we're talking about now. And those folks remember that. And they've told me, if that happens again, after being here through everything we've been through for the last 15, 20 years, I can't stay here. I will find something new where I will be compensated. And it's that they've been that clear and direct with me. And part of my job is to retain great people.
Sure, and I would agree with that completely.
And so it's an important issue. I can't lessen how critical this is.
And understand where I'm coming from. I am not saying I'm saying, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't challenge the creativity of saying, is there a happy median? So I think in my original email question to Katie was, is there the potential of looking, because I tend to be pessimistic from a financial standpoint because I had to go through the market turn with the company.
Exactly.
Okay, so I had to sit there and lay off people and reduce wages, and it wasn't fun. So I'm pessimistic, but at the same time, I'm trying to be optimistic from your standpoint of saying, this is a 5-year projection, which is, it gets very blurry in terms of accuracy, okay? And that I would agree on. So I'm trying to look at from a standpoint, can we stagger an increase in conjunction with making targeted cuts, which aren't fun, understanding that if we come back in a year or 2 years, we have the idea of, okay, things are better, even better in a year than we thought they were going to be. So now we can do phase 2 and phase 3. That's the standpoint I'm coming from of not saying that our employees aren't worth it, but at the same time understanding what I would hate to do is do X, we do the full bore, and then in a year or two, we're making even uglier cuts to those people we just gave raises to. Because I'll tell you right now, having to eliminate employees to me feels a lot worse than not giving a full-blown raise from my standpoint. I would much rather keep someone employed with benefits that has a family than giving them a smaller raise and then tearing it out. So that's the angle I'm coming from, knowing that, as Keith said, I have a higher mark. I mean, I'm shooting for a $400,000 to $500,000 mark from my standpoint. So can we get there creatively between those two avenues? So.
But did you want to respond to that?
I just wanted to say that we have run the staggered scenarios, and I didn't present them all here, but we ran staggered scenarios. We ran starting at entry level and then moving it up. We ran waiting a year. So we ran all those different scenarios, and none of them got us where we needed to. And what I'm hearing you say is, what if we did them in conjunction with other things? And I think that we have just taken the stand that that's not where we want to go. So I'm hearing what you're saying, but I do want you to know that we have run a lot of staggered scenarios, a lot of those things. So.
That's fine. And again, I would agree with the general counsel's sense of, I don't want to run the city. That's your job, and I think you're very capable of doing it. I was throwing out the idea, but if your sense is you'd rather go a different route, I can completely go with it. I do have a number in my mind that I'm targeting from a standpoint, so that was just a thought I had. So
I've got Renee, Tim, Kim, and Susan.
I guess some of my statements are kind of obsolete now, but I wanted to back up the fact that you didn't come out and say it, but it's less expensive to try to retain our staff than it is to have to go out and hire staff that leave. The other point that I wanted to make was, I'm trying to go back to my thought process here, was the compensation study has been a start, stop. A previous counselor Henderson's out here. She sat on council during that. I know my first time around. And to have completed the compensation study and not implement, again, the morale issue. I actually sit on the other side of the fence. Is my thought process is we implement, we go with the budget, and we allow the staff the opportunity to see what they can do with that budget, taking into consideration Councilor Kuiper's observations and how much better staff have done with the general fund over the years, instead of going after the big $400,000, $450,000, $500,000 a year cut. So those are just my general thoughts.
Tim?
Yeah, just to echo and add some more color to what Renee said. In my experience in the private sector, when I've had to do layoffs, especially when you're in a positive economic cycle, if you don't take care of the employees, you're just compounding the problem at that point. So I agree with Katie and Joe on this, that we have to take care of the employees and making sure we're bringing them to market as we go through the struggle. Another way of saying is set them up for success, and set them up in such a way that they have the tools that they need to manage through this.
Kim? It's pretty much echoing. I think through all the years, where it's the senior management who seems to keep getting pushed off. Like the unions, they always get their raises, right? There's always negotiations. They keep going up. Our contract employees seem to continually get their raises. So there's this one little hub that seems to get used over the years of budget crisis. And when you risk not bringing them to market and bringing them down to step one or closest step to where they're currently at, you risk our union wages now. Is that the word? Thank you. Compression. That you may almost have a top level union with a senior management with very little difference. And I just think bringing them to market is the right thing to do. Susan. And then Councilor Kuiper.
So I have a couple questions. On our chart there, that 5-year, does that anticipate what level of increase on PERS? What's our...
Yes, we have preliminary numbers for the next increase that will happen not next year, but the year after that. So we already have their preliminary numbers. Those have been built into this model. And then we've done a similar increase. I checked with surrounding cities, finance directors, to see what they were projecting to make sure that we're all using similar amounts in our models. And then we plug those in for the next 2 years.
Okay. And then, again, on the black line, that is not saying our management team at status quo or at...
No, it's saying...
It's a certain level of increase, but not as much as the mid-range increase that...
It puts them on the salary schedule, but not at market on the salary schedule. So it puts them at level 1 or 2, wherever they're closest, but it doesn't get them to market.
So, and let me just translate that, because again, we're just from town. So most of our staffers, our management team have capped out, right? They're already at the top of their scale. And what this compensation study is to start a new scale for them. Is that right? Where
for all employees, yes.
Yeah. So so then they can start advancing again because they weren't capped out and just put at the COLAs. That's been the problem with a lot of our management. They've been already, at the top of their scale. It's not that we haven't been, paying them. It's just a new level of compensation scale that allows them to progress, right? And I think part of what Tyrone's saying is that part of the challenge in all of this is there's a finite amount of money. And so am I wrong in the black line? Does that mean that they've stepped up to a new scale?
So they've stepped up to a new scale. The scale was put together for the entire city. So the scale is intended with certain gaps between the different steps, and it was set for different levels of responsibility. And if you've been with the city for 5 or more years, you should be at level 6 on the scale. That's how the scale is set up. So with the unions being set up, and their agreement isn't exactly that, but it's fairly close. It ends up almost exactly the same. They then are moved up the scale depending on their seniority. And so with the leadership, what's been proposed is that they would also move up so that, so for example, I haven't been here very long. I've been here 2 years almost. So I would be at step 1. Whereas the other directors who have been here 8, 10, 12, 15 years would be at step 6. We're not asking to put them at step 11, which is where they would be if we gave them as many years of seniority as they have. We're just asking to put them at step 6, which is where they would be after 5 years, after having been with the city for 5 years.
And the step 1 on the new scale is still an increase for them.
Yeah, but for some, it's as little as $400. And if I've been here 15 years, and I know you're telling me, Joe, that this is the market, this is what the market is, and I've worked hard here, I've done a good job for 15 years, and great, you put me on a new scale and I got room for growth, but you're not even paying me market after 15 years. I got a problem with that. That's
Right.
the conversation that I will have with department directors.
So I like to look at this as not a raise. This is a true up. That's really what this is. It's a true up. And quite frankly, even someone like Katie is not even going to be trued up, right? Because she's less than 5 years and she's being paid below market rate. She said so herself. So the true up even is not going to be for someone who say has been here more than 5 years. They're not being trued up at a 10-year level as a public employee. They're only going to be trued up at a 5-year level. So it's really not a raise. I would not think of this as a raise. It's really a true up. It's really making sure that the people that are here are being paid not for the years that they have been here, if it's over 5, but trued up at a 5-year scale, right? And to reiterate what I think maybe the chair and a couple of other folks, Katie, to go back and choose a new, say someone coming in to do the same position for someone who's leaving, there's a loss. A loss in training time, a loss in less experience for the same position, even if we just true up. So I think that's the rub, and I think that's the way I like to look at it.
We asked you a week ago today to come up with these scenarios. And like several others, I've sat on this committee for a few years. And in years past, Joe, you have gone to senior leadership and have said, what else can you do? Where else can you cut? Did that happen in coming up with these scenarios?
Remember, this is a different challenge than in years past. So we're looking for cuts that are ongoing cuts, not one-time cuts. So even if we went back to each department and said, cut your budget, cut your training, it's really, we'd be cutting training for the next 5 years. And we really can't do that. I mean, we're not looking at one-time cuts like we've done in the past few years. We've been looking at ongoing expenses, which is really labor. So that's where we have focused.
Okay.
I have not gone back to my department heads and said, trim some more. You could probably squeeze some more savings. You're not going to squeeze $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 out. That's people.
Right. So then.
So I want to make sure you understand it's a little different than in years past.
I do. My follow-up question, though, still is our senior leadership has and will continue to work very hard. There's no question about it. But are there other scenarios in which we could perhaps even join some of the other department heads? Like, I mean, when I look at some of the budget detail, and I look at IT, and I look at the city recorder, and I look at the city manager, where can we merge? Could the city recorder's position support the city manager? Could we reduce admin in your department and reallocate hours in Sylvia's department or in other departments so that all of the needs are met, and administrative tasks are still being addressed throughout the departments?
So I have met with all the different departments, and I have talked to the different department heads, and we've talked about what can we do, where can we cut, where can we combine, what can we do. I've talked to the different admins. How much room do you have on your plate? What is the percent you have left? Would it be possible for you to work with this department? Would it be possible to do that? So much of what you're talking about, we have done. Joe may not have, but I have. I have talked to the different departments. We've tried to see where we can combine efforts, what we can do. We've also looked at different scenarios. So the ones that are in front of you are only the ones that have been vetted. For example, we looked at the library. We looked at how much is funded by the county versus how much is funded by the city. We looked at all the different reorganizations that have been done and the different programs that have been offered. We've compared to all the different cities around us and the different libraries. Are we competitive? Are we not? Could we reduce hours and still get the amount that we need from the county? So that's an example of one thing that we did. Met with community services. Well, what if we cut the events and permits coordinators as opposed to the arts manager, and what would that look like, and how would that impact functioning? Could we have a half a person over there and share with a person over here, and what would that look like? So these are scenarios. I don't want anyone to think that we've picked positions that are easy positions or positions that are empty. We have truly looked at all different scenarios to see what we can come up with. And that example that I gave you with the legal secretary, or excuse me, not secretary, the legal assistant, and spanning the departments, that's one of the scenarios that I brought forward that didn't make it on your paper, but that is one of the examples that I'm talking about that are part of that thought of how can we merge and group things. So that conversation is happening, and they have been proposed, and what's in front of you is what we believe will be the most functioning way to do it. This doesn't mean that there won't be overlap and people working together. What you're seeing here is what we need to move the budget forward, to get the budget adopted next week so that we can move forward. Then our job then becomes, with the numbers you have given us, how do we then increase efficiencies? Because we'll probably have a supplemental budget midway through the year that's then going to move some money between administration and community development, or it's going to move some money between IT and public works because we ended up splitting this person, or we ended up moving this person over there. So what we're trying to do right now is figure out what's the minimum number of people we can get all the work done so that we can get through the budget process, so that the 5-year for the general fund as a whole is where it needs to be. Then our job really starts in figuring out the fine details of where we're going. So does that answer a little bit?
It does.
And it doesn't end just through this budget. I think it just continues, and it gets actually more complicated because we're dealing with less people to get the work done.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. We have to be creative, and I'm confident we will be creative because we will need to be creative.
Well, and, I think one of the things that strikes me is I was, listening to a council meeting this week, and there are some pilot program discussions being had, and all of that, to me, says resources. And all of that, to me, says if our city council decides to shift gears and shift focus of staff, how is that then going to impact the work that we have on our plate, that senior staff has on their plate now? And with the cuts that are being proposed, how is that going to translate into how effective their productivity is going forward? Tim, go ahead.
It's a really good question. So you just added a second question for me.
You're welcome.
One of the things because we did talk about the broadband pilot in the last work session, and Brad had talked about how he thinks he can do most of that with existing staff, and a lot of that staff's getting charged to the general fund today. So as we've modeled this out, have we looked at if we did that? Obviously, the staff would get charged to the enterprise fund for broadband and put some relief on the general fund.
What existing staff are you talking about that's currently being charged to the general fund?
Well, I'm assuming IT is charged. They're not being utilized for that function in the enterprise fund today, so they're getting charged somewhere else.
They're getting charged in the enterprise fund for work that they're doing in the enterprise fund. So there's not a savings to the general fund. And then the workers, as far as the maintenance workers who would be out there, are people who are working in streets and things like that. So they're being charged to other utility funds. There's very little savings in the general fund, so that has not been put in there.
I thought I'd try.
But it was a good effort.
So I'm going to another effort here. So it comes from my experience selling software to local government. There were many times where we would look at our call logs and say, such and such city has never called us on the point of sale module or whatever, right? And we'll call them up and say, hey, are you having any problems? Oh, we don't use that. Have we been paying maintenance on that? So, and then they cancel maintenance, right? So you almost don't want to make the call. But the point being is have we done we've talked a lot about personnel cuts, but have we done a really thorough audit of all of our software as a service, maintenance contracts and all that, just to make sure that we're actually using everything we're paying for? And I think where the devil in the detail is, if you're buying a lot of products from one vendor, there's potential that there's a module in there that we're not using that we could call the vendor up and say, hey, let's just cancel that particular part of the contract.
So we've done brief reviews. We haven't done a thorough overall review. And we do have a decentralized purchasing and contracting and all that. So I would say that needs to be done. And I know that that's one thing that we've talked about in senior leadership is reviewing our contracts and getting a process and all that. That's in the plans for next year. But it's not something that can be done in time for the budget. So again, it's one of those things that I foresee as a reason that I do believe there are savings that will bring that line up to where we need it to be. But I don't believe that it can be done in a week or 2 weeks.
Do you think you can come up with an extra $200,000 in savings in doing a more comprehensive review?
No, but I think we could probably come up with between 20 and 50,000.
I was hoping for 200. Nice try.
Or 500.
Yeah, I know 500. Well, if you're done, I mean, I'll let you.
Well, so this is for me, because several of us said we have a number in our heads.
Yeah.
And the number for me is 400 is, what I was looking for. And from the big scenario B that you're recommending, we're only 29,000 off from that number. So in my mind, at least from my perspective, we're so close, right? So, and that's why I was bringing up the contract stuff and some of these other things. And to Councilor Kuiper's point, we've tended to exceed our budgetary goals, so can we, instead of just hoping that happens, maybe just codify that in terms of the budget that, we're going to commit to going after this little bit of extra.
So I'm still trying to figure out why you guys are stuck on 400,000. So, and this is my reason, because if I cut 30,000 in contracts, it has nothing to do with if I cut 30,000 in salaries. And if I cut 30,000 in on-call salaries, it has nothing to do with if I cut 30,000 in director salaries. And if I cut 30,000 in a tier 1, that's not the same as if I cut 30,000 in an OPSERP. So giving me a number doesn't tell me what the curve is going to do. And so to me, being stuck on a number, is only being stuck on a number. And what I need to know is, where do you need that curve to be? Because each number, depending on what line I put it in the model, is going to make the curve act differently. And so 30,000 is not just 30,000. It's not that straightforward.
Mayor Mays, actually, when you started the conversation, you talked about that line isn't where you want it to be.
It is not.
So that's for you, what I heard from you.
And I'm sincere that I want the line to be close to 20% after 5 years, and I'm betting on.
So which, this close or this close?
At least 17, and I'm betting that I have great faith in city staff. I think we have great staff. I hate the notion that we're having to make cuts. That's why I'm not even wanting to suggest the individuals or positions. But to get much closer to 20% in 5 years is a big deal for me. Because I want the curve to be flat, or actually to be trending up, just like the 20% number will be trending up for the next 20 years. And it's important for not borrowing from other funds to fund ongoing operations. It's important for bond ratings for whenever we do borrow money. It is important just to be prepared when there is a recession, and there will be one. I don't know if it's in 2020 or 2024, and it just will lessen the blow and the burden then. But I do have, like I said, I have tremendous faith in our staff up and down the org to get creative in the coming months to improve that going forward. But
So Mayor Mays, do you have a motion?
there's some other folks that want to talk that haven't talked yet. I'd rather.
Okay. Go ahead, Nancy, and then Sean.
Please.
Okay. I just want to mention 2 things.
Nancy, could you kindly move the microphone closer? Thanks.
I want to mention 2 things on the cuts as I saw them. These were very brave. As I read through them, my jaws dropped. It came back, it dropped again, it came back. But you did exactly what you were asked to do. And I want to thank you, Mayor, for suggesting that. Thank you. Because when I joined this committee, one of the things I said is, I do not want to be there the year we go bankrupt. And that would be my only goal. And it's hard. Our economists talk about full employment. It's not true out there. Let me tell you, I work for a company that just cut a lot of people and just cut salaries for a lot of people. And we're in a tech industry, and we're doing fine, and we're making money hand over fist, but it's not going into people. It's going into technology. So that's the reality of what's happening. And we as citizens are having to take the few dollars that we do get and stretch them. Yeah, I do. So my other question was, when you were looking at this scenario, I noticed it wasn't across the board. There were some departments that weren't touched at all. And had you run the numbers on those departments also?
We didn't run numbers on scenarios that didn't fit the bill for what we believed would benefit the city. Okay. We talked to all the departments. We looked at all of the positions, literally all the positions in the city, and considered them. I didn't run the scenarios on every position because it's a lot of work, each scenario, but we considered all of them, considered the impacts for all of them, considered which ones would be acceptable impacts, and then ran those scenarios.
Councilor Garland, did you?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm about to say isn't going to be, it's not a decision that this budget committee is going to make tonight or next week, but it's certainly something relevant to the discussions we're having. And it's probably more discussion for the mayor and my fellow councilors. And so, I am very also admirable or admiring, the difficult choices that are being made here by Joe and Katie and the rest of the city staff that are putting through. These are difficult cuts, and I hear everybody agree saying these are difficult cuts. We're looking to cut expenses as a way to change these trends. I would like to, pun intended, plant the seed that we also look at making some difficult decisions on increasing revenues in the city. And by that, I mean to my fellow councilors, we have an opportunity out there for increasing revenues year after year after year. That would be an unpopular decision from from our council, as it has been voted down twice now by our city, by our citizens. But I would like us to at least consider looking at repealing the ban on the recreational marijuana sales. We saw last week statewide shared revenue, $57,000 a year. We know we would get that money. We don't know yet what the actual additional revenues would be for sales. We won't know that for a little while. I think conservatively, we could probably guess at least $50,000 a year. I'm going to say it's probably going to be much higher than that. If we're talking about an additional $100,000 to $150,000 in yearly revenues for this city, think of the impacts that's going to do for our city, rather than having to make these difficult choices next year and the year after and the year after on cutting. I'd just like us to consider options for increasing revenues. So it would be a difficult choice, but I hear the words thrown around: creativity, being brave. When the ban was put in a few years ago, I know some of the words that were used by that council at the time is they wanted to be cautious, see what happens to other cities around us. So I think we've had some time to see that. I don't know if we are in a position right now to be cautious any longer. I think we need to make some difficult decisions. So something to consider.
So going forward this evening, as a committee, we have the charge of choosing to go with or vote on one of the scenarios that are before us, or potentially going back to staff and asking for something different. That's where we sit.
I have a question.
Councilor Kuiper?
Yeah, so it's for the finance director. So Mayor Mays mentioned the bond, like what would our bond rating be? Is there a magic percent that you would need to keep in your general fund in order to have a really good bond rating?
No, there isn't a magic percent. It has to do with how your statements look over time. And your financial policies and all of that. The 20% is probably the lowest you would want in your policies. And they look at your current year and they look at your policies. They look that you have a 5-year forecast and that you're discussing it. They do not look at what the 5-year forecast looks like in the outer years, just that you're taking it into consideration when you're making your budgets.
And when we did the financial policy 10, 12 years ago, we didn't really have one, and we met every month as a finance committee and dug deep during the recession and did lots of hard things, and we set that goal, and the floor was 10%, and we wanted to be 20%, and nobody was, and that's because we were in free fall to zero. So if I was to advance a recommendation to this group to consider updating that policy, it would be the floor of 20, or the floor of 15 with the target of 20 or 25. But at the time when we did that policy, just in context, it was really, really bad times.
Thank you. Could I make a suggestion, Chair? Would it be possible to do an informal poll and go around and have everyone just say which scenario they would be willing to go with, just so we get a feel of how far off we are from any consensus? Because I honestly don't have an idea of how close we are to a consensus or not.
I think that's reasonable.
Can I ask a question in relation to that?
Sure.
I think I started to hear a number, not a scenario.
Yep.
Is that right? I'm going that direction too, because you have already made a great decision. But I don't think we're here to micromanage. None of us are trying to do that. And you talk about being numbers related. I think we go for a number, because if we talk about a particular scenario and lock you into something, that you guys turn around and say, hey, wait a minute, I have somebody else who's not going to do this, and maybe we can make this adjustment. To me, that's more, that's the better management tool for all of us.
Well, what I've heard Katie and Joe both say is that the number may give or take what's been printed on this page based on next steps. Correct me if I'm wrong.
If you give me a number, I can get you that number.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it might not get you the result you want, but I will give you the number that you tell me to give you. So if that's where we want to go, we can go there.
Is a percentage, thank you. Is there a percentage? Is it percentage-wise better? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What percent? Is that a better
well, there's a difference
request?
between in 5 years versus the current year. So what I'm hearing from the number is current year cut. So if we're going for 400,000 current year, then I can create that scenario. The issue is that when I come back next week, I have to have a full, complete budget that you can adopt, which means that every single fund and every single line of this budget is going to be changed between now and next Thursday. Because every number affects every other number. So I'm going to have to change the entire budget. So I need very clear direction on where we want to be, because we cannot come back next week and say, no, that's 30,000, but that's not really what we meant. That's not where we want to be in 5 years. So I just need to be very, very clear on what exactly you're asking for, or we won't be able to finish the budget next week. And if we don't adopt the budget, or not adopt, but approve the budget next week, we won't make the legal deadlines to get through the advertising and the hearing and all of those things. So we'll need to call a special meeting. Anyway, there are ramifications. So
Amy and then Tyrone.
Katie, I think what I heard you saying earlier too is if we give you a number 400 and you do 400, it could be if you do people A, B, and C, that 400 line is going to look different than if you do D, E, and F.
Exactly.
So I think what you guys have already done is given us your best scenarios based on the management of the city and given us the numbers here. And if we say, hey, go back and come up with another 30,000, it could totally change each one of those lines. So the number isn't helpful to you. Is that
Tyrone, or Katie, could you respond to that?
Is that accurate?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
Tyrone.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing as Amy in terms of this, if the scenarios are what you're comfortable with, then I'm good using the scenario model. And you were asking like where did that number come from? For me, it came from if we did move forward with the wage study and increase wages roughly 500,000. In my mind, I want to try and save 500,000. So if we do move forward and give everyone those fair wages, then how do we balance that? So the scenarios, in terms of my standpoint, that accomplishes what I need. So I could tell you from what that standpoint moving forward. So it would be C.
Yeah, I was just going to
Can I
suggest.
ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
What I'm hearing from a large number of the group is what the number that's bothering people is what's happening the fifth year out, right? Because the fact of the matter is, we've got a balanced budget today, right?
Right, and if we
So-
wait, I'm not going to interrupt, sorry.
Wait.
But I want to make sure I'm understanding what's driving this conversation is year 5. Is that correct?
It's every year.
Each year going forward.
Okay, but the fifth year being so far below the 20% mark.
So in an effort to just move the meeting along a bit, let's do an informal poll based on the scenarios that have been presented. This is not a formal vote. This is just to gauge where folks are sitting. I'll start with Sean. Sean, what are your thoughts? A, B, C.
I'm in favor of B.
Kurt?
C.
Mayor Mays?
I would do C, but retain the maintenance worker.
Amy?
I would follow city recommendation at B.
Counselor Kuiper? B. Paul?
B.
Counselor Young? C. I'm going to defer it for the moment. Counselor Browse?
I would follow city recommendation, B.
I would say C, but with the suggestions also what city staff is already doing of being creative, because I don't think that we can really hamstring our legal department.
Counselor Griffin?
I trust Katie and Joe in this regard, and I think it's brilliant, the creativity that's coming out regarding the legal assistant and the I think I vote for B with some of that creativity spread on top.
Tyrone?
C.
Counselor Rosner?
I'm going to say C2, but kind of from the opposite perspective of what Councilor Griffin just said, is that if we could take some of that conservative estimates that we do that always leads to a good outcome at the end of the year and maybe codify some of that. So, but I'll leave that at your discretion.
And Nancy?
C.
And I err on the side of working with our staff and trusting the recommendation. So I would be comfortable with your recommendation with scenario B. With that said, if I've 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we are at a stalemate.
Short break, like 5 or.
Great.
Sure. Let's
At 10 and come
actually
back at
reconvene
8,
at 8.
Oh, and it's time for Katie's son to go to bed.
Oh, yes, Paxton, go to bed.
hear me now?
It's fine. Oh my God, no.
Oh, she's so excited.
Okay. You don't even know how.
Say it like you mean it.
That felt so good.
Blair.
So, in an effort to respect the fact that we have someone here from the public that would like to comment, I'm going to go ahead and open up public comment period. So I'm going to now open the meeting to public comment for the 2018-19 City of Sherwood budget. If you would like to speak, if there's anyone else, please do fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to Jean. At this point, I believe Jean is the only one that has turned in a form. Is that correct? Jean, when you come to the microphone, while you know what to do, please state your name and city of residence for the record, as this hearing is being recorded. Please speak clearly into the microphone. You also need to limit your testimony to 4 minutes.
Eugene Stewart, property owner, property across from City Hall. Lived in the area most of my life.
Thanks, Brad.
One of the things I see missing at these meetings is a discussion about what the property owner can afford to pay in property taxes. The budget seems to be based more around on not so much services, but personnel. And with seniors getting hit with rent increases all the time, water rates are high. There's no programs for the elderly as far as a break on their water bills and other things. Most of them are on set income. We don't seem to consider that too much. If people are below a certain income level, they certainly should be getting a break on their utilities in the city. I think what needs to be thought of is if you can find a number that the public would accept for their property taxes, and then build your city around that number. I hear you talking about union wages going up all the time, and the seniors not seniors, but the senior staff not getting their raises. Well, why are we raising union wages if we can't afford to give senior staff a raise? And are we cutting off other services that need to be done for just the normal citizens around town? Some of the fees I see that are charged, right-of-way fee for water, electricity. I don't take ownership of electricity until electricity hits my meter. So why am I being charged a right-of-way fee? It makes no sense. I own my sewer till it hits my property line. So why am I charged a right-of-way fee for that? Never have been before. You look at our fees, that's such that, I don't know, something is wrong in how we are budgeting and running our city. Now, one of the big problems is the fact that we're a bedroom community, and we cannot afford, the city cannot be a bedroom community and support itself. I think Tim was telling me it takes 125% of what you pay in. Well, if you're a bedroom community, you're lost. You're going down the hill. That's why you got that downward slope. But yet, if you would go out and actively support commercial coming in, bring the Tonkin area in. Well, why was it when Costco was looking at locating in Sherwood, we should have been over backwards to get them located here? It would have been jobs and a property tax base. So I think we need to look at what we're doing, take a deep look inside ourselves. And let's not worry so much about what staff's being paid. Let's worry about what the citizens can afford to pay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jean. We did have one more public forum. Linda Henderson.
Pardon?
It's movie trap.
A little bit, yeah. Linda Henderson, I'm not going to give my address. Lived here 20 years. I have a number of comments. I want to commend staff. I had the privilege of working with them for 17 years on budgets, and have always been very impressed with what they're able to do. We've never had a budget like Hillsborough where we have almost unlimited resources, and yet we live in a town where obviously tons of people want to move to. So I commend staff and then budget committee members as well. I would like to wholeheartedly support the efforts to implement the compensation study. Long time coming for me. Many, many years went by where I advocated for such a study and it didn't happen, and I was very disappointed. Not only for the employees, but because I thought it was the right thing to do, given it's one second most profitable way to keep your employees and limit turnover. So I wholeheartedly support moving forward with that. And then secondly, thirdly, the other reason I came tonight was to advocate not for scenario 4, because scenario 4 included elimination of the Cultural Arts Center manager. I have a lot of skin in that game, and I see that as a great asset, great balance in our community, and I would not be whether I stand here or sit where you're sitting. I don't think that's going to be an issue, but I think that building is a multi-purpose facility that serves all ages, all physical abilities, and all interests because of its multiplicity of use, and would hate to see that services reduced. So I commend you and good luck, and I hope you finish tonight, even though so, thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Just before we took our break, Councillor Young and Susan Claus had both a couple of additional comments.
So I did. I just wanted to clarify my polling vote when I said scenario C, which I still wholeheartedly believe in, but I have concerns about cutting the maintenance worker. I just don't know that our city can do that. So I, like with Mayor Mays, would support C, but without that. And so I'm hoping maybe those of you that were on the B might be able to swing to the C, because that's eliminating the finance tech position, which is a half-time position. So that's the difference between the two.
Susan?
My point is, and I'm still with C, but I don't want to see the maintenance worker go. I mean, I know that Craig and his people can be completely creative. I don't know if there's a hybrid between C and B. And the reason why I'm not saying a specific dollar amount to go for is because I have a lot of confidence that you guys will figure out your resources, and when you get when you, like, I know what you're talking about, Katie, is if you just want a number, I'll give you a number, but we're talking about a labor number, and we're talking about because of the PERS and all these things that have been driving it, and we've put this off for years, and now we're here. And so my point is, if here, and here may look different in 2 years or whatever, what I love about what everybody's doing is everybody's engaged, and we all are trying to figure out, you guys are in but at the same time, don't want to micromanage you guys. Our town can only afford so much if we've only got so much revenue coming in. So nobody's trying to make a terrible choice. Everybody's trying to make the least intrusive choice, but to be fiscally conservative. And so for me, I'm thinking more of an amount and then letting you do more of your magic. because you already showed to me that we can still retain the legal department and have that support system that's critical and work through that, so.
Sean, I'm going to let Katie just.
I'm just trying to make sure that I get clarification on where we are, since we're kind of split, and I'm trying to see where we're meeting in the middle. What I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the general consensus is that we want to closely approximate this yellow line here. We do not want to lose the parks maintenance worker. We prefer to have someone with legal knowledge on staff. And other than that, that staff needs to go back and figure out how to do that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that?
Well, that's, I think, what Councilor Young said, and that was going to be my comment as well, is I selected option B because I thought losing the park maintenance worker was a step too far. I don't want to go that far. That's why I chose not to go with C. While option B is a difficult choice to make and difficult option, to Joe's point earlier, is option C, and I think in losing the park maintenance worker, has too big of an impact to our citizens, and I am not willing to go that far this year with this, with these cuts. So I selected B with that kind of train of thought, but if we're going hybrid here, then I agree with Councilor Young, is that's, yeah, kind of a big B, little c. I mean, yeah, however you want to.
Okay. Actually, excuse me, Paul, and then Councilor Rosner.
Yeah, I want to compliment Katie again on putting this whole thing together. I just noticed one thing on scenario B that I didn't see before, although I read it several times, was an addition of an HR analyst. And if we do not fill that position, it would help die. It would help on saving the maintenance worker from C.
We have to have someone in HR. We don't have anyone currently besides Tom who's running HR. So if we cut the assistant city manager position, that leaves no one in HR. And a city can't function without someone in HR. It's a huge risk. So it's not something that we could do. Just so you know, if we do a hybrid between B and C, I'm not sure about how to keep the legal person. I can tell you that we can go back and we can run scenarios with the guidance that you've given. But I'm not sure if that would cut too much admin, cutting the finance tech down to half, as well as, I mean, with the scenario A cuts the legal position. So we'll have to talk.
Councilor Rosner and then Councilor Kuiper.
One quick question. Well, first of all, I want to echo what Councilor Young said, is I selected C hoping for a hybrid between the two. And just to put some more clarity on my position on that, I'd rather not see the maintenance position cut either. But I think somewhere in the middle there is kind of where I'm at. And I think that would, 17, I think, I would even be happy with 16%, you know, if that helps out a little bit. And that's it. I forgot my question.
Okay, well, we can come back to you. Councilor Kuiper.
Sure. So just to clarify, scenario B was built upon internal reductions such that our community would not see reduction in services. If we were to go with option C and keep the maintenance worker, that means, based on what I understand, that something else that the citizens are going to see in their services reduced will be cut. That's what I'm concerned about.
For clarity, that is not my point. When I assumed that C, the numbers of C would be reduced by the budget savings would be reduced by the maintenance worker position returning to
Don't replace it with something else. Just
Right.
remove that from the scenario.
And understood. But my understanding, though, was that those scenarios have already been worked out, which is why the city manager and the finance director came up with B, because that was the option where the community would not see services. Is that right?
So
Okay,
we did
all right.
we did not run the in-between scenario that we're talking about.
Okay.
Because
All right.
it did not fall on one of the scenarios that you were asking for. So to get that $100,000 difference between scenarios that we were looking for, we grouped things together.
Okay.
So, but what I'm hearing now is that we could go somewhere between scenario B and scenario C, making sure that the idea being we're not impacting citizens. We get the equal cut as if we had cut the half finance tech plus scenarios A and B, and that we figure out how we do that and still accomplish everything and hopefully have enough legal assistance to still do what needs to get done.
And the savings, I know we don't want to focus on the number.
But the savings would be very
somewhere
close to 400,000.
Close to 400,000. Magic, Keith.
And you're still concentrating on keeping the legal.
Yeah, I think we heard loudly.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
We heard that. We're just going to need to run some different who can do what, because it's just a lot of juggling around of just making sure we have enough support. I do think we can.
I think we can do that.
I think we can do it. So if we come back, so what I would need to do then is to run a full budget with exactly what we've said in mind, and I'm confident we can do that. Then I will come back with a revised proposed, then for adoption next week. Just so you know, this will impact all the other funds as well. Not very much, but it impacts the overhead, and it will impact payroll a little bit because some of these positions do little bits of work elsewhere. So there will be some impact to other funds. So that's why I wanted to just come back with everything, with all the funds, so that we have a final book to look at.
Katie, with all of that said, and taking into account several of the comments Councilor Kuiper has made and others have made, this fiscal year we are doing a lot better than anticipated.
Artificially.
Sure. And based on, oh goodness, I'm concerned about stretching this number beyond scenario B for the reasons that you and Joe have shared.
But stretching it to end $400,000 savings in this current year's budget, when we're B's at 374, this goes back to Councilor Rosner's comment, we can do that.
Okay. And you feel?
I think it's a little bit more of a stretch.
Sure.
But with time to kind of figure this out, we can accomplish what I hear will get at least a majority, because right now you're kind of 7-7. So some kind of hybrid makes sense. You may not all vote for it. You may say it's too much and I can't support this budget, which is your right.
Sure.
But it's ultimately going to be the majority of this group that's going to move this forward.
Sure.
Does that become a sustainable number, though? Does that get us to the year 5 mark?
No.
Or is that is that more cuts for the year?
It will likely be, it'll keep us above 20% for 3 years. But in years 4 and 5, we dip below, and Mayor Mays has made his point, among others. That's concerning. Mm-hmm. But we have time. Years 4 and 5 are the more kind of crystal ballish.
Let me rephrase my question. Is it a one and done year?
No, it's not. This is
so
not
it's a sustainable decrease in budget.
And that's what they believe. Ultimately, we'll find out how the staff as a whole cope. Mm-hmm. How they're able to shift and see if it's truly achievable for year over year. And we don't know what we have our crystal ball, but as you say, year 3 to 5 is fuzzier.
I mean, they're projecting, they're not predicting. I mean, I think there's a difference there.
So Tim, Nancy, and then Paul?
Nancy was before.
Oh, my bad. Nancy, then Tim.
I know that there's development going on in Sherwood. I walk past it every day. Across from the police department, we have a hotel going on. Have we been able to forecast how that's going to affect, say, next year's budget?
It's forecasted all the way 5 years out.
Okay, so that is those numbers
Yes.
are taken in. All right.
Tim? Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor. Sorry. I know.
Actually prefer Tim.
Okay.
I just want to kind of reiterate in a different way some of my concerns about why we need to hit some of these 5-year targets. We talked about bond ratings. We just got our rating from Moody. We were at AA3, I believe. And we are, so to context, Portland's AAA, which they're a couple notches above us. Tualatin is as well. AA3, we're one notch from going down into the B category. And so if we want to go out for a bond, or not even a bond to the public, we want to get loans internally and those types of things, that affects our interest rates and our ability to do that. So I'm concerned about that.
It's good to know.
And it's things that you just don't also realize, not to interrupt, but I am.
Can you hold that thought, please?
Yep.
Counselor Kuiper?
Well, it's tangential, but I'm just going to say it out there. One of the ways that you can increase potential revenue in the next 3 to 5 years is during the comprehensive plan update, there are properties that could probably be rezoned to something other than what they are now, which is residential in some form. So there are properties that make more sense to be zoned commercial. And that is, I'm just throwing that out there to folks because that's one way to increase your bottom line numbers. So I want everyone to know that.
So Paul and then Mayor Mays.
I just think whatever we do, we need to follow the comprehensive salary study to keep the employees that we have. That's a real concern to me.
Mayor Mays.
So we borrow money. People don't realize more often than the public knows for water projects or other utility type things. So bond rating is a big deal.
Chair, do we need to, are we going to, since this is my first time, are we taking another vote tonight? Are we taking another straw poll?
So,
Can we give them more specific directions? I want to change my vote. So. But was it a vote?
No, we didn't take an formal vote.
You want to change your
I
informal
would like
opinion?
a motion.
Yeah.
Opinion.
So we have the option for anyone on the budget committee to make a motion. If a motion is made, it will need to be seconded. We can then have discussion, and we can choose to vote. We will need to vote if a motion's made.
I would like to make a motion that we give staff direction to prepare a revised budget with a hybrid between scenario B and scenario C, and keeping the maintenance worker.
I second that.
Any discussion?
I think one of the things that we didn't probably clearly state last week, and I think perhaps would have helped coming into tonight's discussion, is that impact on the citizens, and that this shouldn't have hit them. I think if we would have maybe more clearly stated that last week, that maintenance worker might not have appeared in your projections or not. But I guess maybe going forward, I think we all have a consensus on that that's a concern of ours, or am I speaking too far out of turn?
I think it's good to see those scenarios, though.
It is,
Yeah.
but I think coming back from next week, though, I think is there a fairly clear consensus that maintenance worker, we'd like to keep that, and not to lead you too far.
That was in the motion. So the motion is, just to clarify, the motion is direction to prepare a revised budget with a hybrid between scenarios B and scenario C that will keep the maintenance worker.
So I guess let me clarify that a little bit then. So in your reworking of the budget and coming back with a hybrid or a revision, that there wouldn't be anything that would be added in that might impact the
Services.
citizens? Is that something, services, or is that something that you're thinking already, or?
Somebody revise my motion.
I was going to say,
Well,
can
I'm
we
just
revise the
throwing it out there
motion?
just
So
as
a motion
discussion
would
point
need to
right
be,
now.
yeah.
I can-
I'm not saying that's the motion.
We'll
I just
revise
wanted
my
to make sure
motion.
that I'm just kind of doing a pulse check here.
Okay, so I'm going to revise my motion. Can I do that at this point? Are
If
we at
it's
the right
seconded,
place? They've seconded
I second.
If they revise, if
One is
they
seconded.
second your revision,
Okay. So my revised motion is that we give direction to staff to prepare a revised budget using hybrid of scenario B and C with keeping the maintenance worker and those revisions to not have any impact on our citizen services.
Okay, that's fine.
Any discussion?
I just want to add one thing that I think Kim was right. I understand what Sean is saying, but I think it was great for us to see it. I wanted Craig to come up and explain very specifically what that meant not to have that maintenance worker. Because, you don't, I see the maintenance worker like once during the week. Well, obviously they're here for 40 hours or whatever, right? They're doing all kinds of things. And so I thought it was very informational to have all of that listed. This is what may not happen because one person is not going to be on that team. I thank Craig for explaining all of that.
And Chair.
So I appreciated having that scenario.
Chair.
Yes.
That's why I really do support the revision, because I think that it needs to be, somewhere between B and C, but that doesn't result in any reduction in what the public would see, and that includes things that I would not be able to support, which would be reduction in, senior center staff, Parks and Rec, Public Works type folks. So, okay.
Please.
So I echo what Councilor Kuiper just said. I think that's important. And I just want to reiterate two things. One thing I've already said, but, in my experience working with a lot of cities across the country, we have some great staff here relative to what I see in other organizations. And I appreciate the hard work. I know these situations are tough, but I want to reiterate it's important that we take care of the staff. So I fully support the implementing the salary survey as we discussed.
So I just have one thing. I want to make sure of something. Katie, is that you guys are going to be able to work around so you have your support, right?
Me personally?
For the finance department.
The finance department will have adequate support, as will the other departments in the city when we are done.
Correct. That's our challenge to figure out.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that we're not saying that we value the maintenance worker over the financial tech if that is going to do something to our finances, to make it.
We'll make sure that we have what we need to make sure the finance department can function and that all the other departments are taken care of.
Any additional discussion? So now I'd like to then call for a vote. At this point, at the time that you vote, please raise your hand either in favor or against the motion, and leave your hand up so Jean can record all of our votes, please. So all in favor, should I reread the motion?
I think we're okay.
Okay. So all in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Jean, you good? Great. Okay. All right, moving into debt service fund. Turning it back to you, Katie.
Okay. Find the right piece of paper here. This is the problem halfway through the meeting. One of these pieces of paper has the page numbers on it.
77.
35.
77. That's debt service fund.
So if you'll turn to page 77, debt service is very straightforward. We're left in our debt service fund with just one issuance, and you can see the detail of that on page That's not where I wanted to go. That's why I needed my notes. There's a tab that's called Debt Service and CIP. I wanted you to look at page 35 first.
You were right.
Where I started.
So page 35 describes the city's debt. And this is found in a few different places in the city. So we have the debt service fund, and that just has one bond left in it. That is the police refunding bond from 2011. That's the only one that's left in there. Then we have the URA that has quite a bit of debt still outstanding. And then we have the water fund that also has debt. So you'll see as we go through tonight that there will be some debt lines related to the water fund and to the URA fund. And if you turn to page 36, it will give you the debt payment schedule. One thing to point out in the chart at the bottom of the page is that it starts out with every year, and then the convention is that after year 5, it goes in 5-year increments. So if you wonder if our debt jumped up all of a sudden after that, it doesn't jump up, it just groups it in 5-year increments. So the debt service fund is on page 77. We set the levy to be the, yes, I'm sorry.
On 35, the interest rate on the cannery project, 0.55%. How did we get such a low percentage rate?
I have absolutely no idea.
Tom, do you know anything?
Historically, 35.
I don't. I'm not sure that that's actually. We might want to check that number.
Okay.
Okay. So we set the levy for that, and when we adopt the levies, we set it such that it will be 5% more than the amount of debt service for the year. And the reason we set it at 5% more is because we tend to have 5% of people that don't pay their taxes. And in past years, they have set it for exactly what the payments were. And that's why, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, we found ourselves in a position where the debt service fund kept going negative. And nobody could quite figure out why. And it's because when you set the levy, you need to set it 5% more than what you actually need to keep that balance. Any other questions on debt service?
Can we go back to 35 real quick? Because Councilor Rosner made a comment that I want to go and clarify before our next meeting. So if you look at the paragraph above where it says general obligation bond limitations, it says in February 2017, Moody's upgraded the city's full faith and credit obligations from A1 to AA3, and we just heard it was AA3 again. And he said we were one step away from being downgraded to a B, and that's inconsistent to what he said. So I want to make sure
that I was questioning that as well.
That was based on when I went to Moody's and went through their rating schedules. That's what I saw.
Yeah, so I want to actually bring that back so we can fully explain where we are and where we would go if we went down, because that seems to say something different than what you had found, and where we would go in terms of going up. So just for full clarity, so. Sorry, I just wanted to bring that up.
So if I could just respectfully request that conversations in the room, other than what's being had at the table, if you would just step outside for side conversations, we'd very much appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, the TLT tax, and if I could only, the TLT fund. I'm sure we'll finish the meeting and I'll find my paper. 78? Okay. On page 78. So the transient lodging tax doesn't have a whole lot in it right now. This is a fund.
$2,300. I know. Oh, no, there's not. That's what you're proposing. Sorry.
This is a fund that we will be setting up at the next council meeting. It hasn't been established yet, but we've set it up on the managerial side so that we're tracking the money that's coming in. We get just a little bit from Airbnb, things like that. But we do have a hotel that's going in, so we anticipate there to start being some money, not next year, but probably the year after that. Don't know yet exactly how much, and we haven't set a local rate if we do want to do that. That is also an option that we need to look at over the next few months. So that would go into that fund. We don't project any expenses out of that, so it's purely money coming in. No, we're creating its own fund so that it doesn't get mixed together, because there are restrictions as far as tourism use for those funds. And then we're hoping to set up a program where people or organizations would submit applications to the city, much like we do for the Metro CEP grant, and then we'd have a discussion on how to use those funds.
So I would anticipate using any of those funds to be at least 2 years out, maybe even 3 years out.
And just for example, the places that might apply would be like the Chamber, the Art Center, the Main Street, you know, things that bring tourism.
So moving on to the grants fund. The grants fund is on page 79. That is to account, currently is only to account for the Metro CEP grants. When this proposed budget was prepared, we just put the full amount in there. I have not changed it for the exact amount awarded. I don't personally see a need to do that. We could, but it's a simple fund with one purpose, so I say we just leave it as is and move on. If we do get a special purpose grant, we would put it in this fund as well. For example, we put the HEAL grant in there this year, that we did the bottled water stations to fill our water. We accounted for it through this fund, and that allows us to track it separately from general fund activity. And we can also put the pay for people in public works, for example, who work on a grant project, so that we can carefully track it separately.
Who makes the decision on the award of the fund?
We have a committee, and currently the committee is the council and the Councilor Dirksen, who is from Metro. So everyone submits the applications, then the committee meets. There's a scoring process that they go through, and then they're awarded based on the scores for those applications.
All right, and now we'll go ahead and welcome Craig Sheldon to do his presentation on Public Works and Enterprise Funds.
And just as he's coming up here, I want to point out to you the information on the CIP, which is found on pages 37 through 43. And the reason I point that out while Craig is coming up is because his funds have a capital component to them. So this next part may be a combination of Craig and then some with Julia as well from community development, because of engineering's work where they share duties with Public Works. So we may go back and forth. So if we're referring to a capital project and you're not exactly sure, that's the section where it describes all the projects we'll be doing this year.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. And before he starts, at the very back of your packet, you had 2 pages that were 3-hole punched. I don't know if you recall that I had said there was a snafu on the streets fund, and we didn't quite have the numbers for the streets projects. So those have been revised. So you have a new page 80 for your book, and then you have a new street ops detail also that goes with it. Don't tear out your page 80 in your book, because it has the back side that's another fund. So. So the numbers changed for the projected 17-18 as well as the 18-19 proposed.
Right before you start.
Can you,
page 1 of 1 after 78, the private grant that drops off, what was that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I didn't even hear you.
4702 on revenues and expenses for the grants. $8,000 that's not.
That'd probably be the HEAL grant.
That was the HEAL grant.
What grant?
The HEAL grant for the bottled water those stations.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Craig, dazzle us.
So we're on page 1 of 2 right off of 80 then?
Yep.
So we do have a little bit more revenue that Katie mentioned last week. Fees from registration through. Started last January. Got got mine in December. So, some other seasonal wages you'll see will be up a little bit in the wages. That is due to increasing to $15 an hour for those positions. You see the engineering architectural, that's it.
Thank you. It's here.
In other professional services, that's a variety of things in there. That sidewalk program, some of the other technical services, the outside sources that we need, gone up a little bit. You'll see electricity, 6301 has gone up. That's really some additional lights that we'll have from new development this year, as well as rate increase. Water purchase in there, that is for our streetscapes. That's what we pay a year to the city pays to the city. And you'll see a reduction in repair and maintenance of streets, 6318, but you'll capture those costs down in 7010 this next year. And really, those costs are our slurry seals program, our pavement management program, our tree trimming program. It goes actually in one up from there, but it's our striping, markings, and then you'll see in the projection it comes down because there's a section about 400,000, 385,000 that will not be done this budget out to next year because of streetscapes, you'll see a decrease, but we're still providing the same level of services. We rebid a bunch of contracts this last year, so that brought some of the costs down. You'll see $50,000 in 6323. That's on we're replacing wooden light poles. We had about, I believe, 82 in our system. We took them over a 3-year period. Just old poles that are brought out, the PGE and with the PGE on.
And so are those the big tree poles, or they're the wooden street poles that are just essentially a 2x4 or a 4x4?
Yeah, like a 4x4 they were put in a lot of the developments like in the 70s, that kind of stuff, and we're replacing those out. About $50,000 a year for the last 3 years. So.
Are we putting wood back in at their place or something else?
No, it's current the black cobra style is back in there.
Thanks. Great.
Operating materials and supplies, 6498, you'll see an increase. Really, we're expecting our crack sealing material because of oil prices to be a little higher, as well as any of our asphalt that we actually purchase and do. The asphalt price is going up, so we've increased that. And we put a little bit in there for additional ag for our program. And then you'll see the infrastructure projects listed below, and we have that's that grant out of our pavement management program. Where those numbers come from and projects. Some of those projects next year is throughout the city. If I can be more than happy to tell you where they're at, but it's really the overlay projects are stuff that's rated down below a 40 that needs to be. And most of them are towns. You'll see Baldwin's on there. Baldwin out by it's just a grind-in overlay, so it's not a reconstructed like part of town. There's a section on Sunset between Eucalyptus and the railroad tracks, I think, somewhere right in there. That's in this budget. So the street budget, what I can tell you is the level of service you'll see from that. I'm not going to use status quo tonight. Our level of service is going to be the same as you will have seen in past years.
So how can it be the same if the number, for example, on street trees and landscape has gone down, though one of your goals is to improve the sidewalk replacement program and that sort of thing? Are you reshuffling?
No, so we rebid a bunch of contracts that we do for our streetscapes, and they come in lower because usually when you run a contract out for 3 years,
sure,
or 4 years, there's cost yeah. Costs that they can come back on, as well as we're still providing $25,000 a year for our tree trimming program. Our sidewalk program still providing $50,000 a year. So we're providing the service, same level of service that we've been able.
Great.
Maybe the question is, why has our hours gone down?
Yeah.
It's because it's probably been moved over and
okay, just reallocated.
Yep. We're not having to do this year in the streets.
Thank you.
And just so you guys to know, council had a goal several years ago of our, when we went to a pavement management program to get to 80 PCI and hold that. We had our roads rated this last year. There was a change in how they rate the weather of the road, but our overall rating is 86. So
Oh,
we got that
excellent.
from 77, but I caution you on that 86 number because you have your arterials that are rated like, that's an average of 79, and then you have your collectors that might be in 84 or something like that. So in your residentials, which we've dumped a lot of money in slurry seal, so that number is high. So out of the 55 miles of road, we don't have we're right up there. We don't have that many. Our percent's very minimal of roads that are in poor conditions. So that's where the street maintenance fee goes towards.
Wallen and Sherwood, is that city road or county? County.
And they're going to be making that 5 lanes the next few years, so they're going to do minimal
Moving on to
maintenance.
street capital. 82. Oh, Craig, please feel
So
welcome
if
to
you
stay.
remember, last year, it's kind of, you've got the operating funds and the capital funds, and the capital isn't quite as interesting to go through line by line because it's really, projects. If you look at the top of page 82, that's where it lists the projects that are being done in the street capital. These are generally funded through system development charges. The projects on the left-hand side are going to be truly capital projects done by engineering. The projects on the right-hand side are what I refer to as operational capital projects. So they're things that are necessary for operational maintenance type of things that engineering is going to be providing assistance with, but it's really a public works driven project as opposed to like a new road or a wider road or that kind of thing. I hadn't planned on going line by line through this because it's really not your traditional department type of budget, but I'm happy to answer any questions, as is Craig.
Does anyone have any specific questions?
And then I also want to remind you, as last year, we do have a draft CIP that we update every year. This is on the website. We're happy to provide copies if you want it, but it's kind of thick and it doesn't change significantly, and we encourage you to look at the website if you want to see details, not just on the projects that we're proposing this year, but the 5-year project list as well as all of the projects that are essentially in all of our master plans are found here.
For anyone that may be watching tonight, Julia, can you just on the website, can you, or can someone let us
If you search for
know.
The CIP, I know it's, if you go to the City of Sherwood website,
Sure.
www.sherwoodoregon.gov,
Yes.
if you go to departments under engineering, it would be under the
Okay,
capital improvement
perfect.
program
Thank
projects.
you.
Julia, is there a copy in the library as well?
You know, there isn't, but I will make sure that there is by tomorrow.
Thank you.
Good idea.
We're on it. Here.
it doesn't go on the shelf same day.
Make sure I have given it to them by tomorrow.
There's a process.
Okay.
Dewey
So if you
Decimal
want
or
to look
something.
at,
All right, I don't think anyone had any specific questions for you on street capital.
so if you just look at the screen real quick,
Yeah.
if you go to government and down to engineering, and hopefully I'm in the right place. And then right here,
Yeah.
CIP of projects and CIP plan.
Great, thank you very
That
much.
takes you to the document.
Great. And actually, also, while you're pointing folks in the right direction, it's great to let folks know that this proposed budget is also available on the city's website for public viewing. And at each of our budget committee meetings, we are accepting public comment. Just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, we can move on to water.
Okay. 4, and then we'll go 1 and 2. Just kind of point out, this is, we'll be providing the same level of service in this section of our department also. I do want to, there was a comment made about low assistance programs. Each of our utilities have a low assistance program here. We run it through the Salvation Army. We put in $1,800 a year for this program, as well as $900 a year out of each budget of $300 out of the utilities for a hardship program. And what I can tell you is it gets used every year. We took it out to a third party, so we have nothing to do with that. And it gets used every year, and I think our lead utility billing person told me today we're down to about 2 hardship programs that we can help between now and the end of the budget year. So we do have the program out there. Starting in water, 84, 1 of 2. You'll see other professional services. That's a variety of things that there's an increase there. From the projection, you'll see a variety of things that come out of that, from our leak detection program to our cathodic protection program on our pipeline from Wilsonville to if we have to make repairs to the reservoir roof on the old reservoir, to if we need to bring the divers in to clean our tanks, to hiring a plumber to come in and work on the backside of the meter, because we can't do that service because we're not plumbers. It's part of the plumbing code. So that's what you'll see in there. You'll see in 6214, the dues to organization has gone down this year, and that is because of the Willamette River Water Coalition. Our fees have gone down because they're not doing as much, charging us as much as what was going on, because really the WRWC is doing something different than what they were doing before we had the partnerships of Hillsborough, TVWD, and Tiger. So that'll go down. That goes down. You'll see on the second page the big cost in water is we purchase water, 1.4, almost $1.5 million a year out of that. That's just what we pay out. That's based on how much water we use, and we add a little bit to that. Every once in a while, we have to bring a supplemental back because we have higher consumption throughout the year if we had to go into October, but that's what we're planning this year. You'll see on repair and maintenance of streets, there's kind of different numbers, and that is 6318. You'll see it goes clear down to 15,000. One year we had a water main break on Willow Court. That was the 112,000. And then one this year for the 138 was Century Drive water leak. We had about 400 feet of roadway we had to replace because somebody hit a fire hydrant.
Craig, can I ask a question? Oh.
I believe our leak was working through that, but they were not covering some of that. So.
Who are we purchasing the water from?
City of Wilsonville.
Okay, so it's
partnership. So they send us a bill every month. And then down to the infrastructure, that's a variety of infrastructure projects that are outlined, and I can go through those with you. To the right page. So we have emergency repairs is in there. We have a water line project up on Norton Street, older part of town, to upsize the water main in there, fire flow protection. About 141,000. We have our telemetry upgrades. It's been in the budget the last couple of years that we just have not got to, and hopefully we'll be getting to that this next year. And then well 4 decommission. Working with the state, it's best if we decommission, tear the building down, and then try to move water rights if possible. And there's no guarantee that you won't be able to move those water rights. So that's what that money's for in 70. Yeah.
Just real quick, going back to, you talked about we had that low-income program for water. You said there's 2 hardship cases left. Is there more demand for that than we have the ability to offer at this point?
Not at this time. One year we've left money on the table each year that we have not spent, and then a couple different times we have spent up to about one. There's usually about $100 or $150 left in this program. I don't have the exact number tonight, but I don't remember staff coming and asking if we can go over that.
One of the reasons I'm asking is Metro's about to put together this affordable housing bond, and that would be something awesome for them to consider, offering funds to the water districts to offer low-income programs. So, worth asking.
Actually, I do have one question about that too. How well advertised is that program so that people do know that that is available to them?
So our billing staff is working with a person that has an issue they feel that they might qualify for, and they refer them to the Salvation Army. I believe they put it out on Facebook before in the past. I don't know when, but I believe I've seen it over the times. We do talk about it, and we let people know. It's usually the person that calls in that can't pay a bill, and then they have to go through certain criteria to be able to meet that. It's just not given out. other questions on water? And you'll see our loans from our water project in the 8,000s. Water capital. Okay. So water capital this year, there's a lot of there's stuff going on. Wilsonville's doing quite a few of the projects at the treatment plant. So we have a surge mitigation that's in this budget. Really, when we did our water line project, once we reached 12 million gallons a day capacity or usage out of that plant, we were required to put a surge in so it doesn't blow up our tanks or our pipelines or their pipelines. So that's going to be happening this next year. We were purchasing through the new Willamette Governance Group agreement through TVWD, so there's money set aside so we can purchase the next capacity increase in this budget. Our water management and conservation, there's still some money left in this one. It's actually out for review right now at the state, so it's actually going to run into the next budget year. So it was in this budget year, but there is a small amount. Treatment plant expansion, starting to work on the design stuff of moving forward, how we're going to expand the treatment plant in 2021, something like that is the date. The Brookman expansion, that's if we're actually the developers come in and we have to do that work. Some money's in here for that. We have our normal routine water main replacement, your SCADA system upgrades, generator and electrical upgrades at the treatment plant. Part of this big study we've been working on, there's a deficiency in the generator to be able to produce both cities' water, so we're trying to get that so we can have a generator and not have to use curtailment as much as we would right now. Our resiliency plan of our water system is in here. We took that out a couple years ago because there wasn't a lot of cities that had done it. They were just getting started, and now there's a lot of data out there that we'll be able to capture. We'll be the first one or two people to do that. Tonkin Employment Area Expansion Loop, if that actually happens in this budget year. You got the Norton Fire Line that we talked about, and then there's some seismic upgrades at the treatment plant. Questions on the capital side? Sanitaries off of page 90, I believe, or
88. Yeah.
So nothing really has changed in the revenue part. Our seasonal wages are up a little bit. Other professional services, we have a variety of things in that category, but it stays pretty consistent every year. Everybody always asks about immunizations, but we have our employees have shots because they are working in sewer, and it's a Fed requirement. I mean, it's a OSHA requirement that if they're touching the stuff, we should be doing that. It's not a lot of money. Our 6598, there's an increase in there for general equipment. That's where we buy our hand tools, we buy nozzles for our equipment, hose for our equipment, that kind of stuff. You'll see an increase. Infrastructure, some of the projects planned for that is Washington Street, sewer line replacement, which is right out here between 2nd and 3rd. Manhole repairs, there's about $50,000 in there. Foundry, which is the street over where Public Works is at, there's a sewer line project over there this year. And then something at other equipment, there's a telescopic unit, a tractor that we use to TV our lines. That's what the $17,000 is for, is so we can replace their current tractor unit. What I can say is CWS is planning a 3% increase this year for sewer. As of, we just got notice here, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or so. Some of those things will be going out in the mail if they haven't already, or in the utility bills if they haven't already. So that's what their plan is for sanitary. Anything else on the sanitary?
So I've got sanitary capital. There's actually only 4 projects in this section. A lot of the projects are really done through the operational section. There's a Washington Street sewer repair project, a Old Town mid-block sanitary sewer repair.
What page are you on?
I am
91.
actually 91. I was actually referring to the CIP, 5-year CIP project list on page 38 of your document as well.
We're working on the design of a Rock Creek trunk capacity upgrade for sanitary sewer, and then the city portion, Clean Water Services, is going to be working on design of a Brookman sanitary sewer extension, but the city staff will be providing support, so there's some funds for staff coordination with Clean Water Services on that. So that's what's included in the sanitary sewer capital projects that engineering is going to be doing.
Julia, are those numbers on your page 38 tracking over to, what would it be, 91?
Yes. And it's not,
yeah.
It's not going to be exactly dollar for dollar. So the personnel model goes in from exact hours from an engineering model. The numbers in the CIP model come from an estimated average for engineer hours. So the numbers in the budget are based on actual people and the places they've been assigned for the next year's work plan. The numbers in the CIP just use an average for whoever happens to do the work on it. So they're slightly different because of those personnel numbers. But the overall total for a project, we make sure that they're in line with each other to make sure there's adequate budget for the projects.
Storm ops 92.
So, and sorry, I'm going to be a nerd really quick. So on the sanitary sewer, we're at 309,869 from the CIP. And then that translates to the 309,644 over in the budget on 91.
Yes and no. You probably have some capital and some operating mixed together on the CIP because it uses different funding sources, whereas in the budget they're split apart. So,
close.
So I have tied everything out. So in the long run, everything loops together. But yes, there are some that are split out to different funding sources.
Okay, Storm 92 will go one of two. You'll see in 198 it's gone down a little bit. 6310 are water purchases. That's for when we go in and redo a water quality facility. And we have irrigation running to keep the plants going. Really, and then the next page under general equipment, I already talked about hoses and nozzles and tools, cones, barricades that we use. We split the storm and sanitary stuff between both divisions there. A lot of the similar work. You'll see down under capital projects, outlay under infrastructure, it's up a little bit this year. Some of those projects are the Murdoch, finishing up the Murdoch drainage part that we started on that's located close to the apartment complex there, Murdoch Apartments, but it's on the other side. We have inlets that we're actually working on, and then we have some storm projects on Foundry. We'll lam it to the into the street by Public Works. The Sunset, a lot of the projects are the same as our street projects because we come in and replace or update the storm system as well. So eucalyptus to tracks, Washington Street 2nd to 3rd, Woodhaven Stellar Pond. In Woodhaven, there's a pond that's not working adequately. We go in there and rebuild the pond pretty much and then replant it. That's when the water cost comes in because we have to keep the plants going because it's not functioning correctly right now. And then we have a project, Washington Street, which is right over here on Washington, Willamette to the barricade, which is on the backside of the Art Center. And then Cascade Court, there's a project behind some homes back in there that we need to get in and do. So, and also this funds part of the transporter that we use it in storm and sanitary, so both funds pay for that unit. What I can tell you is CWS rate increase on the storm this year is 6% or 50 cents. Their rate increases between storm and sanitary, I want to say, average it out, it's about $1.83 EDU is how that should work out, or ESU, whatever you want to, but all together. I do know Julia will probably maybe talk about it, but their SDCs, they just put out some numbers on that too, that are increasing about 2.7% in the storm side. So I don't know exactly about the sanitary side yet. So Any questions on the storm operations?
No?
And this is a good example of, I think what Susan was getting at is there's some blending between the operational capital projects and the CIP capital projects. So if you look on page 95, there's quite a few projects that Craig mentioned that actually are capitalized, that show up in the capital piece, but they're actually public works things. So in this one, the only one that engineering specifically is doing is the Oregon Street Regional Water Quality Facility, and that's going to be tied with the Oregon Street project that we're going to be working on the design of next year. And I believe all the other ones were actually mentioned by Craig when he was going through the projects that he was working on as part of the operational program.
Can I ask a quick question? That Murdoch apartment swale, is that piping that, or is that just cleaning the swale?
It's cleaning. There's some other detention times and stuff for iron out environments, and then on the other side of
Okay.
A lot of the stuff by the apartment complex has been completed already.
And the Cedar Brook outfall project, is that part of this year also?
It's in this budget year, yeah.
And then I think there's this budget year or next budget?
We actually are designing ready. We actually are bidding it, but if the work won't start until after July 1st.
And is that by where is that? What part of Cedar Brook is that?
So it's right there for us.
So for those at home, it's on Cedar Brook between 99W near the apartments.
What I can tell you, back to the operation, we go from 5 to 5.6. It's mainly reallocation of staff time. There's no additional staff in there. And I do want to this is providing the same level of service that everybody got last year, as well as added some time to our environmental programs, which is our private water quality facilities we are required to go out and inspect and work with the property owners to bring them up to standards. And we are staffed up to do that this year. So actually working with some of the property owners to get them up. It's just not letters going out. There's some property owners that are actually wanting to do the work.
Can I just ask a logistical question? Some of the time Craig's voice trails off. Is it still picking up like for at home? Or was that one of the problems you were talking about that you were having from last?
That was one of the problems we were having from last time, was sitting too far back, and so then the microphone doesn't pick it up as much for on TV. And
So Craig, you just said something really important, that the level of service would still be the same.
Yes, the level of service will still be the same, as well as we have moved staffing over so we can work with the private property owners that have private water quality facilities to bring them in within compliance. They won't all happen all at once. It'll be 1 or 2 a year, but we've been working on our facilities, getting them up to compliance, because I've always felt that our facilities needed to be up to compliance before we go out and start dealing with private property owners. So there's been a lot of letters going out. Now we need to get to work and partner with the property owners.
Any other questions for Craig or Julia? Okay. Thank you both. Julia, maybe you should stay.
Yeah, I'm going to scoot over, and then Kristen's going to come up.
Kristen, do you want to come on up?
I'll start while she's coming up. We're now talking about the General Construction Fund, which is on page 83, and then on the left-hand side, page 2 of 2 and 1 of 2. So the General Construction Fund is really kind of for everything that's not a specific street fund, that kind of thing. In there, we budgeted for dog park, skate park if we get grant funding. Ice Age Tonkin Trail, that actually includes both a grant-funded bike station and a grant-funded wayfinding signage program. Some of it's actually being worked on this year, but it's going to carry over into the fiscal year 18-19. And then continuing Cedar Creek Trail, we've been working on that for several years now, but it's just continuing into the next fiscal year. And then the Parks Master Plan, we continue to have budget for. We're hoping to work on that as part of the comprehensive plan process and actually start that this year.
So before you move on, one of the questions I had earlier when we started was, as I was going through the budget, one of the things that's been proposed for 18-19 goals is to open up a new all year around dog park. However, one of the things that we've heard from residents is, why isn't our current dog park open year round? And does it make sense to open up a new park when we have a park that's not being utilized to the maybe best of
The location is more central on the.
Craig. Sorry, Craig, I should have known to ask you to stay.
So you will see in most places you go, in cities or park districts that have dog parks that have grass, they're shut off, closed during the winter months. November to February, maybe they open up a week or two when you have nice weather because they don't want the grass ruined. So what they have next to those parks is a chipped, or some people use pea gravel, like Hillsborough does, I believe. So what this park that's in here for $100,000 is really focused next to the dog park at Snyder, in an area that, yeah, there's $100,000 and the other one costs $120,000. You got to put a lot of drainage in when you're using chips, because that's when you don't want to soggy during the winter months. And really, that's what this is for. So you have a winter dog park that you can take your grass dog park off limits during the winter months, and people still have a place to go. So that's really, it's we want our dog park to look good, and if you don't, then it's ruined. It will come spring and it stays mud, and then it's really bad.
So this creates function. And I'm not a dog owner, but this is something that has come up time and time again, and I felt like it was important to bring up.
And so it'll still goes to the Parks Board for review consideration, and still kind of City Council for review and consideration.
Correct.
So that make sure that is the desire of the community.
And Councilor Kuiper, I think, has a question.
I do. And it will be it'll be chips?
When we go through the process. But there's a couple different options they use out there. It's chips, or there's a pea gravel that I've heard things about.
So
make a mess with that.
Okay, so what about downhill migration of those materials? Okay.
Flat.
It's a flatter area.
Flatter.
But it's still got to have drainage in it. Otherwise, the drainage will come down to the new
Yep. Okay. Thanks.
So it's going to go through a process. So let's wait till it goes to the Parks Board and then to us, and we'll.
And this is just allocating the budget.
It's just, it's just flagging it, just like.
I was just asking about the allocation.
There has been no work done on it right now.
So the fact that the CIP, which is everybody's in this, says north of Highway 99, that's not.
That was the original intent, is to try to find a location in another part of the community to kind of spread dog parks around. We really don't have any land that we own north of 99 that makes sense. So we've landed back to the idea of what Craig was saying. Let's just enhance our current one by adding on an all-year facility, and that would suffice, rather than finding a location which would potentially be a purchase of land, and that would cost more money and things like that.
And then before you, did you have another? And then before you leave, one of the discussion points that we had last budget season was the skate park. I know that a lot of work has happened already in terms of design review and identification of location. Will this go back out to residents or City Council to approve at this point, or is this an approved project?
So I can respond to that. It is an approved project. It has been approved by the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So there is a site plan design that's been approved. And again, my understanding is I know that we've submitted a grant to the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And if we get the grant, we would fund the entire skate park. And if we don't get the grant, we will discuss.
We'll reassess.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
What was, there was an issue about insurance at one point?
any government space that's open to the public, like a park of any type, there is no liability on the city. If the city charges a fee to use a space, then there is liability.
We have recreational immunity.
Yeah, and you're referring to the limited immunity issues that were encountered a couple years ago, where you could sue an individual and not the city. The state legislature changed that last year, so that hole is fixed. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
Great question.
Okay.
And the location of the skateboard park is near the Y.
Next to the
Okay.
YMCA building.
What was the time frame on the grant? Wasn't it like September or something? Or Kristen, sorry. The one
yeah.
we find out on.
Yes, yeah, August or September before we would know.
And it will be a very competitive grant. Do you remember the numbers? I mean, it was.
I want to say they had 44 applications and expected to fund 12 or 13, something like
Our
that.
park's better.
Yeah.
But it's going to be very competitive.
Yeah.
And those are lottery dollars that primarily support this fund.
Okay, moving on.
Any
We're
other
ready.
questions about
Nope,
general
nope,
construction?
thank you. I think we are ready to discuss the broadband fund.
We're hiding out, Brad.
Hopefully, last but not least.
Always the best for last.
Right. Almost 9.
You're still awake.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully this should be pretty easy. It's find my notes here.
Page 96.
Not much new this year. The budget is largely a replica of the year before. I will make note about one project. There's a little bit of dollars set aside for that, and that was our Salesforce implementation that we started this past year. It's a software project to basically automate a lot of our sales process, electronically sign our contracts, just have a better way to track our customer accounts. So we've implemented that this year, and there's some continuation this next year to implement some of the billing functionality of it. We are spending more like we did last year than we are making, but I think it's fairly easily explainable. There's about $140,000 in capital that should be directly related to new revenue. Most, if not all of it, will be attributed to new revenue. If we don't have any capital projects that are for customer builds or even maintenance builds, that money just sits in the fund and carries over to the next year. So with that, if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
And the biggest change is this is now called the broadband fund, not telecom.
So it is only data, correct?
It is only data, correct? Yep.
Katie or Joe, did you have any additional comments this evening, or?
We can just comment on the plan for next week. I think that this is a really good place to recess, since we can't really do the URA until we bring back the new proposals, because it affects everything, including the URA. So what I would envision for next week is we would come back with an entirely new proposed budget. I will do my best to get it as fast as I can. So my hope would be by Tuesday evening to get that out to you, so that you have some time to review it. I also hope to give you the corresponding 5-year scenario, so you make sure that you know what you're looking at, along with the number of $400,052. So that should be a fairly quick meeting, and along with that, we will approve the taxes. So there will be several different motions that we will have ready for you. If for some reason between now and Tuesday you have an itch to propose any other motion, will you please give me a heads up, because just
a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So this is just different than normal years, where we're changing a lot of lines at the last minute. So we'll do that, and then we will adjourn to the URA budget, and then we will need to go through the process with the URA. The scenarios proposed do cut the assistant city manager position who's currently running the URA, so we will need to discuss briefly how that will change the URA budget. So it will be different from the budget you've been given, although not significantly because other people's salaries have been allocated in order to cover those. But I do want to tell you the budget you currently have for the URA will not be the one that you will be reviewing next week.
Okay. Any other last comments by the committee?
I've said it before, I just want to thank staff, Joe and Katie, everybody else for such an awesome job. This has really been helpful hearing the details.
And I too agree. Thank you for working through the weeds. And now I'm going to go ahead and call a recess until next Thursday, May 24th. We'll see everybody back at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.